Doing low. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. Check, check, check. Go. 1, 2. I got you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being here. We're going to get started in 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds. Okay. My name is Josh Long. I am with Informa, which hosts SupplySide West. I'm the moderator today, so I apologize in advance for that. Couldn't find anybody else. I have some housekeeping announcements, and then we're going to get this party started. Thank you very much for being here. First of all, we'd like to thank our underwriters, CFH Ltd, CV Sciences, Alexanol, KGK Science, Neptune Wellness Solutions, and Rad Extracts. Please stop by their tables for more information on their services and products. Please place your mobile phones on silent mode as a courtesy to all our speakers. And also a reminder, this is being live streamed, I guess, via YouTube. Expo Hall opens tomorrow at 10 a.m. and closes at 5:30 p.m. Join us for the featured presentation with Professor Michael Solomon in the morning. Everybody here will receive an email on Monday, November 12th with a link to all the presentations. And we'd love to hear from you and get your feedback at the end of this whole thing. Let us know what we did right, what we didn't do right, what you liked about it. I'm going to introduce our speakers in a few moments, but I wanted to show you guys a short video in a second, but I figured you could use a little context. I'm a journalist with Informa. We have a number of trade publications. And 4 years ago, after President Barack Obama signed into law the Farm Bill, 2014 Farm Bill, we had an opportunity to go to Kentucky, Murray State University in Kentucky, to do a video project on a company known then as Cannabis. They were there in collaboration with Murray State University, and they were planting hemp. It was a great opportunity. I learned two things when I was there. Number one, Kentucky has some pretty good barbecue. And number two, you could stand in a hemp field for 2 hours and you will not get high. I was as sober as a nun on Sunday. Anyways, a couple months later, after this Kentucky trip, we flew out to San Diego to meet with the executive team of Cannabis. Nice gentlemen. There were some pioneers, including a gentleman named Chris Boucher. You guys may be familiar with him. He's a pioneer in the hemp space. And we met with the executive team. We talked a little bit about this thing called CBD, which I still was skeptical of. I knew it came from cannabis, and I knew cannabis was affiliated with marijuana, so naturally I was skeptical. We had an opportunity to go to the beach, and the gentleman you're going to see in this video laid out his vision. And this was, keep in mind, this was 4 years ago.
We are standing here at the forefront of a revolution. I'm calling it the Hemp Revolution. We're going to look back 2 years from now, and as I said, you'll walk into health food stores and see an entire category of hemp-based medicines. Hemp protein, hemp fiber, hemp antioxidants, germ killers, neuroprotectants, CBD that holds unbelievable promise. We will have an entire category that never existed before to help keep healthy people healthy.
Gentleman's name is Stewart. You'll be hearing from him. He's still employed, actually. So that's good news. I have just 2 slides. The gentleman in the back is going to open those. And then I'm going to introduce our speakers. So this slide is from Vote Hemp. Oh, this slide is from Vote Hemp. It's 2017. It's a little outdated, but it gives you a sense of states which grew hemp and new states which started hemp in 2017. I recently spoke to Eric Steenstra, the president of Vote Hemp, and now the number of states that have hemp legislation has grown to 40 states. So it's everywhere. And this is just I just want to go through the numbers briefly. This just gives you a sense. Hello? This just gives you a sense of the numbers, the revenues. The bar chart and the numbers don't correspond. Sean Murphy of Hemp Business Journal updated the numbers in October because they were better than he anticipated. So hopefully this gives you a flavor of where we're going, where we are, and where we've been. With that, I'm going to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker, I already introduced him. That's Stewart Tomk, VP of Human Nutrition at CV Sciences. Stewart is a recognized authority on dietary supplements with 20 years of experience in the nutraceutical health industry. He was formerly the VP of North American Herbs and Spice, where he served for 10 years. In addition to his service as a global educator for omega-3 market leader, Nordic Naturals, Stewart is known for his extensive print interviews and contributions to books on integrative medicine, as well as his 4,000 radio appearances. A renowned educator, Stewart recognizes CBD and its multiple mechanisms of action to support human health, and he envisions a new category of dietary supplements derived from agricultural hemp. Stewart, come on up.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you very much. It's truly an honor to be here and to look back after this journey. I remember standing on the beach dressed in a suit, screaming into that camera that I had predicted a new category, and it's very exciting to be standing here today. The presentation that I put together for you is an excerpt of some of the material that I just shared at the Council for Responsible Nutrition. We just had an event there called For Adults Only, What the Supplement Industry Needs to Know About CBD, and I'm going to show you a little bit about what I covered. Community is extremely important. We all know that. And can I just see a show of hands of how many people are in the hemp CBD business? May I see a show of hands? Okay. How many of you are members of APA? Keep your hands up. Those of you that are in the hemp CBD business. Great. Please, we just want to encourage everybody to be part of the community. And so the other group you should be part of is the U.S. Hemp Roundtable. So if you're not yet part of the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, please take a picture of this, sign up at hempsupporter.com, because we might need your help. We might need your support as well. I've worked in the natural product industry for most of my adult life. I worked for North American Herb and Spice, and then I worked for Nordic Naturals. And I jumped ship about 4.5 years ago, and I joined this company, CV Sciences. And so I joined in 2014. I launched the Plus CBD product line. But before that, we were winning High Times Cannabis Cups. Totally different market, different product, different customer. And so it started to make sense to us that there really was a bifurcation, perhaps even a trifurcation of markets. So we adjusted our tactic. And then this year, we're really happy to report some toxicology work that we've done and the very first ever GRAS self-affirmation on a hemp extract. So we've certainly come a long way. 2014 was ground zero. I saw this ad a week after I took the job. It says, while beating cancer, Ian used Blue Dream. Molly prefers Kali Mist to relieve pain. What's your strain? And this was a full-page ad in the New York Times. They didn't even have a medical cannabis scheme there. We started writing the articles for Leafly about hemp and CBD, and we were viciously trolled because it's not marijuana. And so we realized different product, different market, different customer. And so yes, the first legal seed in the ground belonged to us. It was a real honor. It's a huge privilege to be part of history like this. This is Leah Black. We've paid for her education. What she's learned helps the world. We've taken the genetics from Holland and tried to plant them here in the ground in Kentucky. I can tell you this stuff does not grow like a weed. Now, one of the things that people have been very excited about, especially the dean of hemp, is the idea that the seeds and the DNA of hemp may be different than medical cannabis. And I love the dean of hemp. He says, Stewart, we'll never have cannabis here in Kentucky until we're surrounded on all sides, and even then, we will never, ever surrender. They like the idea that it's decaf instead of regular. So that is a huge distinction, and one of the points I want to make today about the different swim lanes that are out there. So at first, we started arguing the percentage of THC. Everybody did. And the question was, is it 0? And 0.3 is 0 in math.
and 0.6 is 1. And we tried to explain this to people, and it fell on deaf ears until we contextualized it with non-alcoholic beer that has some alcohol. Decaffeinated coffee has some caffeine. Fat-free is not 100% fat-free, and so forth. And that did make a lot of sense. But we think there's even more. We think that genetic argument of what a true hemp seed is versus a cannabis plant may help regulators moving forward in this gray area. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and we will hear from all the lawyers today. But in the argument about what the customer deserves to see on the label, when Consumer Lab came after the category and they tested the products, if you seek CBD, look for products that list the amount of CBD per serving. So even though we have a big regulatory compliance debate, our company's perspective is it's a very human right for the customer to know how many milligrams of whatever they may be taking. So if you have not yet taken a look at this Consumer Lab report, it's worth looking at. It shows that the market is already being developed based on price. And we all know this industry. We had the little calculators with omega-3, EPA, and DHA, what's the price per milligram. So irrespective of the noise, there's a market. U.S. hemp-based CBD product sales in the natural and specialty channel are predicted to be really remarkable. Now, this comes from the Hemp Business Journal. There are 2 sets of data that I'm drawing from. And let's face it, it's fuzzy data right now, because we just don't know for sure. The other group report that I'll talk about will be the Breitfeld group. They have some nice data as well. The point I'm making about it being fuzzy data, we did 20 million in sales in 2017 ourselves, and this is reporting 27 million in sales. So it's probably a far bigger market than people really have any idea at this point. Rolling Stone magazine interviewed us last year trying to get their hands around the best. What's the best? And I was able to spit out what people have to embrace and accept is they're completely different products and totally different markets with different customers. And I hope that that's the point we're all sort of landing on, that there are different swim lanes, different horses for different courses, right? Different courses for different horses. So our company really built itself on the back of this concept from Professor Meshulam back in 1987. I had not even seen this quote, but it says, much of the research and development into the medical use of marijuana usually concluded with its unacceptable psychoactive side effects. Many drug companies in their research have tried unsuccessfully to separate the medical from the psychoactive effects of cannabis. Now here's the idea. Here's a low-tech way of doing this. Grow low THC, high CBD fiber hemp. The possibility of using the leaves and flowering tops from fiber hemp as a useful medical byproduct should be investigated. That's what we're doing. He says right here, if CBD turns out to be therapeutically useful, this could provide added economic benefit to the development of fiber hemp, which is the other driving force in this conversation. So the first paper we published was to use our hemp extract with low to no THC to treat marijuana addiction. How's that for cute, right? If decaf is different than regular, you better demonstrate that it's the antidote. And then we showed our toxicology work at the 57th Annual Society of Toxicology. It's a giant contribution. And our safety paper, our toxicology paper, this is not about us at all. This is the biggest opportunity most of us have ever seen. So please, we beseech you, if you're bringing a product to market, have the safety data. Please. You'll be able to talk to the lawyers afterwards, walk up, get their cards, but let's all go through the process and demonstrate that this stuff is indeed safe. So Josh already showed this slide, and this breaks it down beautifully. This is the crescendo of the whole thing, 3 different markets: cannabis, hemp, and pharmaceutical derived. No more winner-takes-all monopoly. That's different. Things have changed. So I want to point out the other products. Most people don't study this 24/7. This is a cannabinoid-based drug from GW Pharmaceuticals. It's 2.7 milligrams of THC, 2.6 milligrams of CBD, 5% other cannabinoids. It's basically cannabis in a spray bottle. Now, we've had Marinol for a long time, which is synthetic THC here, okay? Synthetic THC has a safe dosing range about 16 milligrams, and then you reach the toxic psychosis threshold, see? Sativex is not synthetic, it's totally natural. And look at the safe dosing range and the toxic psychosis threshold. It is a completely different product. So Sativex is not the article of commerce that we're dealing in. We're not selling THC. And then the New England Journal of Medicine, when they published their results for the trial that led to the approval of Epidiolex, look at the dose, 20 milligrams per kilogram. If the average person weighs 70 kilos, that's 1,400 milligrams of CBD for drug-resistant seizures on top of standard of care. Different product, different market, different customer. 100 milligrams of CBD per milliliter, 99% CBD, completely different product. So I think this is helpful. I hope you find this helpful to really lay out these swim lanes so that it makes more sense. So isn't CBD just CBD? Well, there's going to be a lot more to unfold on this because the term CBD has unfortunately also replaced hemp extract, and hemp extract means CBD. And the point is, when you take a whole spectrum hemp plant, you're not just selling CBD. The extracts can be loaded with fatty acids and terpenes and plant sterols, hundreds of compounds together. So they are different products. So our argument, the argument we're making, and everyone makes their own argument, we're growing Fedora 17 and Futura 75. Ever heard of those? Anybody? Those are food fiber hemp strains. They're not medical cannabis strains that are known for having high CBD and low THC. That's a different product. That belongs in a medical marijuana dispensary, in our opinion. So if you look at the fatty acid content here, do you see all this? 55% linoleic acid, 20% ALA, even some oleic and gamma-linoleic acid. So one of the things we recommend is look at a C of A of a hemp extract. If it's loaded with fatty acids, that might help tell you that it's a full spectrum product. Now this whole hemp thing is poised to go nuts. 1.9 billion US hemp-based product sales by 2022. This comes out of the Hemp Business Journal. Sean Murphy has done some great work. And look at hemp-derived CBD. As we'll hear from the lawyers, the debate will rage on about the future of this ingredient, but currently the market is consolidating itself nicely. Apparently, two companies, this comes from the Breitfeld Group, CW Hemp and CD Sciences, are really doing the lion's share of the business right now. So this is a nice reminder that as everyone's trying to figure out what's happening, to know that it already is happening. So 1% of the companies were in the top tier with sales of 10 to 35 million are being sold in greater than 1,000 stores. So it is a race out there, and extraction matters. Source matters. 10 milligrams of one CBD product can feel different than 10 milligrams from another product, based on how it's grown, based on how it's extracted. Each product has its own personality. Makes it a little bit more difficult than an 1812 fish oil, which is pretty much the same everywhere you go. We may need some IT help. There we go. 190 million US hemp-based CBD sales by channel in 2017. 60% of the business was done online, but it is an evolution, a remarkable evolution. Though still important, online sales are no longer the largest hemp distribution channel. How's that for paradoxical? Today, natural food stores host 29% of sales versus 24% that flow through online platforms, 23% through smoke shops. By 2022, chained retailers are expected to move 64% of sales. Doesn't that sound like that's a different conversation than the regulatory conversation that's going on at exactly the same time? And that might make it even more difficult for us to get our heads around. A lot of young people are driving this narrative, so they may have a different take on some of these things. The consumer demographic is beautifully balanced between men and women. That's a rare thing. You rarely see a brand new product right out of the gate that touches both genders in the same way. And not necessarily people that have epileptic children, right? That's not the market that we should be trying to support. That should be the pharmaceutical people, right? We should never, ever, ever be trying to help people that have drug-resistant seizures with natural products. So how are users learning about hemp CBD? Word of mouth. It's back. Friends and family. We don't trust anybody unless we know them. We want to see it with our own eyes, right? Truth has been replaced by trust. And so if someone's telling someone else is telling someone else that it's working, we have to listen to that. Now, there's great material out there. This is one of my favorite books, The Medicinal Power of Cannabis. John Hicks was a great friend and mentor. He died a few years ago. He helped children with these hemp extracts. It's a wonderful book if you want to learn more. There's also this very, very exciting new project, Healing with Hemp CBD Oil, by the great Earl Mindell. Those of you that remember the vitamin Bible, right? He's still taking his vitamins. He's still alive and doing well. So what's great is that the customers can go out and educate themselves. They don't need us to make any claims. They can go talk to their doctors. And people are using it primarily for anxiety, depression, severe chronic pain, according to the Brightfield group. And that's very, very interesting, because it appears as if taking the stuff on a regular basis does not alter response to emotional stimuli, nor does it produce Valium-like effects in healthy subjects. So that makes it very adaptogenic, and that really speaks to us, right? It doesn't have that direct orthosteric activity. Now, tinctures are making up 39% of the sales currently, so people really do like the idea of taking the herbal extract like it is an herbal extract. And then people are taking it consistently. So not only is it a hot trend, people are taking it day after day after day. Again, begging the question that if the placebo effect is in full effect, it's really working well. And they're spending significant money, between $20 and $50. So these are people that are willing to spend the money to have this experience. So anytime you find yourself in sunny San Diego, if you'd like to visit CV Sciences, take a little tour of our laboratory, you can stop by the booth and let us know. We're not here just to promote what we're doing at all, not at all. We want everybody in the hemp business to get onto the same page in terms of the safety data. That way we can start arguing about efficacy next. So we have a state-of-the-art laboratory that's all up to snuff. We were just audited by Eurofins and received a 99. So in terms of responsible actors, we are really trying to do the right thing. So I want to end with this. Please understand that time, change takes time. Look at how far we've come in just the last few years. I mean, I'll go so far as to say this. I think we've already done it. We've already broken through to the other side to full acceptance. And the reason I say that is because the fear has so quickly turned to greed. And everybody's just trying to count how much they're going to get. And I think that that's really a great sign that collectively, that we've sort of voted on and agreed that this stuff does belong in the natural product industry, and it does belong as an accessible ingredient to people in need. Thank you.
Stewart, that was awesome as usual. Our next speaker is Tim Gordon, president of CBDRX and Functional Remedies. Tim became president at CBDRX and Functional Remedies in 2016 after 2 years of serving as CEO. He was born and raised in Canada in a hemp farming community, and his love for sustainable hemp farming is only eclipsed by his love for the marijuana plant. Hemp plant, sorry. Sorry about that. Tim, take it away.
Okay, everybody hear me? Thanks, Josh. Everyone, thank you very much. This is great to be up here talking about something that is incredibly dear to my heart, and that's cannabis. You guys, cannabis is the same thing as marijuana and hemp, right? We all know that. It's one plant. But it's very important to us. It's very important to me. And let me tell you a little bit about my why with cannabis. I'm not from any kind of nutraceutical thing or anything like that. I was kind of brought into this, born into this, you might say. I'm a second-generation cannabis farmer. And it's been quite a tumultuous journey from running through cornfields now to be standing in front of you talking about such an awesome plan and such an awesome opportunity. So my why since 1991, when my father handed me a bag of cannabis and said, "Tim, this isn't getting people high." And I said, "Wait a second, dude, this is not getting people high? What's here? What's inside of this?" And that was CBD. That was my first taste of this way back then, and it's driven something in me that has just been amazing. I've got to share this plant with so many people and change so many lives, and really, you guys, that's why we're all here. We're bringing balance back to a population that has been endocannabinoid deficient, where our bodies are hurting. We need this stuff. We need it badly. So my why has been to change the world through cannabis, and it's slowly happening. And I'm so excited to do it, and I'm so proud to be up here to be able to do this. It's wonderful. In 2006, I founded a division of Normal, In 2007, I started one of the first medical cannabis dispensaries in Colorado called Medicinal Gardens of Colorado. It was wonderful. Served a lot of folks, did a lot of wonderful things. I sold it during the big boom of dispensaries in Colorado when everything started to really get crazy as far as medical marijuana and cannabis, etc. I started this company called OG Dynamics, and that's where I really honed my tunes on the international side as far as researching cannabis, breeding, fine-tuning extraction methods. I worked all over the world. I worked all over the United States. And eventually, that work brought me to CBDRX in 2015, where they asked me to come and do some work for them. And it wasn't too long before they bought my company, and I mean, here I am now sitting in front of you guys as president of the company, and it's wonderful. And Functional Remedies, CBDRX, we're different. We truly move no particular way but our own. And it's wonderful. We're unique. We have our own unique genetics, our own unique proprietary extraction method that I think is the most efficacious form of extraction there is for cannabis. I currently am president. I'm also a managing member of a company called International Hemp Solutions. I'm also the president of the Colorado Hemp Industry Association. So that's me in a nutshell, around the world talking about this wonderful plant. So let's talk about some of the evolution here. We've seen some of these slides. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to come down here because I can see a little better and walk around and talk, which I tend to do. I'm more of an educator, so if I point at you and ask a question, don't be afraid. And you guys can interrupt me too. But let's talk about this. You know, here we are in the United States market. We're talking about an estimated profit of over $200 million just in the specialty market. Just in one market. You guys, this is outside of FDM. This is outside of the big dogs coming in. This is just one little market here in the natural and specialty channel. Imagine the potential in 2020, 2025, what it's really going to look like. And it's truly going to be a wonderful evolution. And the evolution, I guess I do got to go up here. The evolution continues. So what's in the market now? So what is in the market now? What are we talking about? What's currently on shelves? As you guys can see, we have a variety of products up here. Here's a typical shelf display. This is at Lucky's Market, Boulder, Colorado. Let's see here. Notice over here, full spectrum hemp extracts. The evolution continues. We're evolving, just like as Stewart has said, we're evolving now to hemp extracts, which contains more than just CBD. It contains a plethora of those vitamins and phytonutrients that are in such a plethora in this plant. Most of the stuff on the market right now is common in the supplemental industry. Like you see over here, a variety of tinctures, very common in the marketplace. Actually, some of the top sellers in Lucky's Market are their tinctures that they have on their shelf right now. Some of the other stuff in the market, capsules, soft gels, topicals such as salves, the typical we see right now across the country. So what's behind these products? What's it start with? Before we go to market, we talk about extraction. And over 80% of the U.S. hemp-based supplement companies right now are using two forms of extraction. And that's CO2 and ethanol. CO2 is a process that uses pressurized carbon dioxide, and it's put into columns, and that pressure pulls all of those desired phytochemicals from the hemp plant, and you have a concentrated, I'll use full spectrum in parentheses because I don't see full CO2 can really do a full spectrum, but it's the most commonly used. Second is ethanol extraction. It's traditional in many botanical extractions. It's been used around the globe for eons. And that's essentially using ethanol to break down the cellular wall and allow the absorption of those phytomaterials to coagulate and concentrate together, and then the alcohol is simply burnt off. So before our products go to market, the hemp is extracted, and that's the base. Here's what ethanol extraction looks like. A small scale unit over there. This is one of the larger scale units where they basically run ethanol, like we said, break down the cell walls, and they can distillate, recapture, and you can have a product ready to use in formulation. There's a variety of CO2 extraction equipment, what it looks like. You'll notice the columns over here where you pack material, CO2 is then forced through, and outcome is a extracted phytonutrient mess of yumminess, call it, which is usually high in CBD. It depends on which kind of plant you're using. There's a lot of larger scale CO2 extraction over on this side. So formulations, we go from extracted to our concentrated material to formulations. So what's on the market right now? So we go from our concentrated oils to a carrier oil. Usually folks are using MCT oil or olive oil in the tinctures I showed you. Very, very common. Formulations lead to soft gels and capsulations. You can take your concentrated oil of 83% CBD, break it down with a carrier oil, MCT olive oil, whatever the many carrier oils may be. And then we have soft gels. We have tablets being made, topicals, drink infusions. All of these wonderful formulations usually start with a concentrated oil and then are formulated as such to produce the products we see on the shelves. This is another Lucky's Market picture. And if you notice there's, I mean, my gosh, I think there's 36 brands right now, plus Lucky Market has on their shelves. The brands are expanding. We just did a little thing here at Functional Remedies to really do a determination of how many brands carrying CBD are on the market right now. We counted 750 north of that. 750 brands. You guys, this is moving so fast. 2014 to now, 750 brands on a largely unregulated market. Holy smokes. So let's talk a little bit about isolate and full spectrum. Isolate. Breaking it down to a single molecule of CBD. A lot of work there. Is there efficacious? Is it efficacious in a single molecule? It is. Our body needs it. Like I said, we're largely cannabinoid deficient. Our bodies need this in any way we can. So extracts are rendered down to a single molecule of CBD using a variety of post-processing steps. So after we do an extraction, there's a variety of steps to really get it down to an isolate form, to that single molecule, to that point of consistency where folks like that. They can use that easier for formulations when you have a pure 99, 100% formula, much easier to formulate. But full spectrum is much different. It's concentrated, but it contains all of those phytonutrients within the plant, or most. It really depends on your extraction method. And this is a little bit harder to deal with because it can vary. With any kind of plant or plant therapies, there's a lot of variance in extraction because it's even like Stewart had said, sometimes your input, which is your genetics, cannot be the same, or there's slight differences as to where you'll have a little bit of difference in your extract. And formulations from there can be a little bit, and I wouldn't say difficult, but can be trying if you're not skookum with your chemistry. Here's a little example of what it looks like. You guys can see what an isolate looks like. It is actually that white powder. For those of you who don't know, when you see a kilo of that white powder, don't mistake it. Here we are, full spectrum over here. This is a rendering of what a CO2 oil would look like with a little bit of post-processing extraction. You can see the nice amber color. I'm going to tell you in there's a bunch of phytocannabinoids, terpenes, probably some flavonoids in there. Some good stuff for you. Oh, this is the fun stuff. The future of hemp products. Well, the future is happening now. I mean, I personally cannot keep up. I get to go and talk all over the place, and I'm hearing, people are coming up with amazing new products all the time. Some of the stuff we see is absolutely amazing. We're going to see specific structure-function formulas, and I think it's going to really broaden the hemp-based category. We'll see it in the anxiety side. We'll see it in the neuro side. We'll see it in I need help with appetite. It'll cross so many barriers and cross so many categories that it will not stand alone, but it will. There will also be a hemp CBD category. I mean, we're seeing it in Lucky's Market. We're seeing it across the country. But like I said, it'll soon cross when we'll have those structure-function formulations. Some of the companies, they're out there right now. Not in the plethora that you see the traditional tinctures and stuff like that in, but definitely coming to the market. CBD infused drinks. We're seeing this. Man, we have great big brands coming. You guys hear Constellation brands coming, big alcohol brand. You see these on the shelves. There's CBD coffee, CBD sport drinks. You see it all over the place. Functional foods, you guys, this is going to be the big one in my opinion. And it only makes sense. We're changing as a society. We're going back to what's really important to us, and that's from the earth. And I see functional foods and hemp-based products really interlocking in the future, where you'll have, hemp-infused honeys. Those kind of wonderful, where they have many attributes of the food, the functional food, and the many attributes of the cannabinoid-rich extracts. And leads to our last one, cannabinoid-rich extracts and products. We have THC, CBD at the tip of the iceberg, but below the iceberg, you guys, there's over 126 other there's other cannabinoids we just don't know about. Well, we know some of them, but largely, a lot of those aren't discovered. I can only tell you guys 83% of what's in my plants. My plants I've developed myself over many, many years, and I can't tell you all what's in them because there's not standards made for the other cannabinoids that are present in there. It's unbelievable. Some examples we talked about. Some of you guys can see some of the drink infusions over here. Here's that functional food right here. CBD and honey. Here we are, structure function. This is a joint formula infused with hemp extracts and glucosamine, sleep aids right here. Here's the cannabinoid rich, where we're not just CBD, but we have CBG over here. All stuff that's on the market, but will also be the true future of the industry. Lots of opportunity there, lots of innovations still to happen. So opening new markets with oncoming demand. You guys, I like to always talk about the sharks that are circling. And then some of the sharks that are circling are these big dogs, the FDM guys. And these new markets will be soon forced to be open with regulatory measures and the oncoming demand. FDM markets like Kroger and Albertsons, who are wanting these products on their shelves. The drugstores, CVS, Walgreens, the Mass, Walmart, Target, all of those guys, they are circling like sharks, ready to have this on their shelves because they know this multi-billion-dollar industry, they want a piece of this no matter what the cost. International markets are opening all across the world. CBD and hemp, while it's amazing and it's getting a huge jump start here in the United States, there's some rather mature, call it, international markets that are already well into the CBD space. Lots of opportunity in the future. We'll see what happens. New categories coming on that we'll see: animal, cosmetic, more functional foods, the alcohol category. From Colorado, in Fort Collins, Colorado, New Belgium Brewing came out with this beer called the Hemperor that's infused with hemp. Huge opportunities, opening new markets, opening new categories. You guys, we could go down we could sit together here as a group and probably go down the list of people in these rows, and we could think of a gazillion new products and new categories we could put CBD in right now. It's going to be amazing. We're just truly at the tip of the iceberg in this industry. So some of the big challenges we have ahead, you guys know this, even though it's the big boom, and we're all excited to be here, every silver lining's got a touch of gray. And that is the regulatory aspect, the FDA, the DOT. What's going to happen there? What's going to happen with the FDA? What are they going to do with this? Well, they got what's happening with GW Pharma, so we're going to see the pharma side. I don't think they're going to stop the train on the natural product side, but they definitely have to step in and regulate. Besides the FDA, you guys, we have the Department of Transportation needs to regulate. I mean, there's so many things. I think our silver lining, our touch of gray is, unfortunately, I'm guessing 18 months out before we have a stamp on this regulatory framework of this industry. Lots to do here. Education is a challenge, much like Stewart said. It's a challenge and an opportunity, right? There are still ears that don't want to hear what we're talking about. And that takes education. It takes breaking down barriers. Luckily, as Stewart said, this demographic who is loving these products, these hemp-based cannabidiol products, is rather young, but it does stretch across. But the young folks are leading the way right now, and I think through a solid education basis, we are going to see what's going to happen in this industry. We're going to see the boom of this industry over the next 18 months. Watch what happens when this regulatory baton from the legislative gets handed to the regulators, the FDA puts their stamp on it. You watch this industry come into itself here. But challenges do lead to opportunities. The U.S. hemp-based industry, you guys have seen this, is going to hit $500 million by 2020. Some of these numbers are skewed because there's not many people reporting. I mean, 2020, that may look like 2019. We don't know. The global market for cannabidiol products is likely to hit $2 billion. I'm going to argue we're going to hit that before 2020. And we may even hit that here in the continental and the North Americas before too long. Like we talked about, there's new markets yet to be opened, and there's new products yet to be made. But the opportunity is real, and that's why you're all sitting here. The opportunity is real to change lives. The opportunity is real to change your lives financially, to better your business, to better your families, to bring yourself into balance. So, I talked about the opportunities and my why. And the opportunities you have is to change the world with cannabis, you guys. You guys have this opportunity before you. I encourage you to do research on the products that you want to bring on your shelves, on the companies you want to bring into your family and your retail side. It's important that you guys understand about GMP compliance and the DSHEA Act, that you know the source of your materials before you bring them into your facilities. Understand that this industry is not going away. Understand that this industry is here to stay and that you have an opportunity to change people's lives, much like I have for almost 20 years. And it's awesome to sit before you, to look into your eyes and talk about this. Like I said, you guys, it wasn't too long ago that I was getting chased through a cornfield, that I've been put in handcuffs by police because of this right here. So thank you very much. I encourage all of you guys to really step into this industry and really take these products, enjoy them, enjoy the balance that it can bring across a global scale.
Thanks a lot, Tim. So we're going to have a Q&A with our two business guys, and then you're going to hear from the lawyers after the break. So we're going to bring these two guys up, and I'm going to open up for some questions. But first, I promised that we would talk about some of the business challenges, and we haven't really discussed that. So being a journalist is fun. You get to ask questions, and hopefully people will answer you or evade your questions. But you're on the record, so don't disappoint us, gentlemen. The first question is, in Canada, they recently legalized cannabis, and I was speaking to a hedge fund recently, and they were talking about all the institutional investors that have flooded to the cannabis industry. You know, companies like Vanguard that have trillions of dollars in assets. My question for you, gentlemen, is when do you think institutional investors will flood to the hemp market? What needs to happen? And this may go to the lawyer questions, but what are your thoughts?
Sure. I think, like I said, I mentioned the shark circling, and it's not singular to the food, drug, mass to Walmart. It's also includes some of these big dogs out there who are looking to enter the space. I've met with some of the groups you mentioned from Canada, Aurora Cannabis, all those guys. It's happening. They don't need anything. They see the writing on the wall. They see the multi-billion-dollar industry. That's why they're willing to take a risk in a largely unregulated industry to come in and make financial investments right now.
Stewart, you work for a public company. What are your thoughts?
Different answer.
Yeah, we are already talking to institutional investors. And so I really echo what has been said. The money people are looking at the business. So I'm sure that the hemp bill is a rate-limiting factor in a lot of people's minds, but in my opinion, in our opinion, the market is what's driving the interest.
Now, in terms of the challenges, you know, dealing with the banks still today and dealing with merchant accounts, I get emails all the time about, you know, merchants pulling the wool over some businesses' eyes. What's happening with the banks and the merchant accounts right today with the hemp industry?
Well, it's still dicey. I mean, it's still looked at as a high-risk product, whether it's a sports product or male enhancement, and it is a rate-limiting factor, and nobody has a good answer to it. There are some companies that are having no problem at all with merchant processing, and other people that are having problems. And it might have to do with the breadth and the depth of their other businesses as well. It's very hard to say. But it is operating. People are able to bank, and business is moving along, but there are stories of people that are getting their merchant processing cut off.
Well, is it fair to say today you still have, the likes of Amex and Visa won't touch anything that do with cannabis today, or has that changed?
Well, a lot of the companies, as long as you're making an argument that it's a hemp product and it is not a cannabis product. I was speaking to a retailer today who I probably shouldn't name their name, and they're about to start selling products online, and they told me today that the processing and the people that they're working with said as long as it's clearly disclosed on their website that they're selling a hemp product and not a cannabis product.
Tim? I think that's likely the case, and it's obviously the differentiation. We have no problems with banking right now, and it's strictly because, as Stewart said, we have nothing behind us other than hemp. We're not in the marijuana space or anything like that. So we have had no problems. We've had no problems with bank cards, with Amex specifically, or anything like that. Been fortunate, but there is a gray area. There is some still, choppy water where it's making folks a little bit nervous still.
What about the big boys online, Google, Amazon? What are their policies? I've seen Amazon say on their website, you can't sell CBD. Of course, I've seen plenty of CBD products, but what are your thoughts? What's going on with social media, Facebook?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of dynamic information going around social media. The big dogs, Google, Amazon. There's companies doing workarounds. We have products on Amazon. It can be done. You have to be very, clever about it in your wording. Like I said, Functional Remedies does not operate on the CBD side of things. We are strictly a hemp extract company. So.
All right, I'm going to open up to a few questions for the audience. Raise your hand. Don't be shy.
I enjoyed the talk. Thank you, Tim and Tom. Sorry, it's just Stewart. Lee Ken from New Jersey, Actors Lab. You mentioned, Tom, or Tim, you mentioned that FDA may lay a hands on the CBD because it's being approved as a drug due to GW Pharmaceutical. But you stopped short saying what would FDA do in the future. What you shed some light on it.
Sure. So this gentleman was asking about the future of the FDA and regulations. And although I'm not a regulator and attorney, here's what I see forming up in the world of cannabis. I see three swim lanes. I see the over-the-counter market. Right now, we call it recreational cannabis or medical cannabis. I don't think there's going to be a decipherance in the future. I think it's going to be over-counter cannabis where you can go in and get THC products as you will. I see the naturally occurring products swim lane, where Stewart's company sits, where my company sits, where you'll be able to find products soon on a variety of natural product shelves across the world. And I see cannabis pharma, like you mentioned, GW. Variety of companies there, Bayer, you name it. They're all working right now on the cannabis side. So I see the FDA regulating cannabis in three distinct ways in the future.
Good. But the CBD manufacturers, they have the FDA regulations, like GMP and whatnot?
I just want to make a note, in terms of the regulations, we're going to have 4 lawyers. They're going to bill you silly, but that's going to be a little later. So if you have any other questions, you probably should keep it to business issues.
Oh, there's my friend Trish.
Hi, I work for Americans for Safe Access. And I'm kind of curious, our industry in the dietary supplements certainly is familiar with a lot of quality control. But I find those people who are in the hemp cannabis industry are making so much money that quality control is not an issue, and there's a lot of products out there that are very questionable. How do we bring them around to our quality issues that we have experienced here?
That's a great question, Trish. There's a lot of opportunities here. Stewart mentioned APA. There's a lot of regulatory organizations who have framework, who can likely aid in creating standard operating procedures for companies and for industries along the way. Stewart, you want to touch on that at all with Trish?
I think it's also going to be difficult, Trish, to get people that are black market operators to come out of the shadows to participate in this kind of technical, nuanced regulatory landscape. And I think then the market will help strip that away. Several people believe that there could be another arm of the government, right, to oversee hemp and cannabis, a division that's never even been created yet. And by the time that happens and the Farm Bill passes and we have to then stand toe-to-toe with FDA, I think that any company that wants to make it will have to be able to demonstrate that they're either part of the group that you're part of or other groups to open up their laboratories. So I do hear you loud and clear, and I think it's very noisy out there, but that one slide that I showed that showed the consolidation of the market, health food stores are very efficient. If something doesn't sell for a period of time, it's gone. So I do think we're moving closer and closer to people hearing what you have to say.
Thanks, Stewart. Question. Oh. I'm just going to go to who I see first because can't see very well. So this gentleman.
Hi. Thank you both for a good presentation. My name is Rao, representing a company called Biopharma Laboratories in Hyderabad. My question is, in terms of market acceptability, is there any difference between ethanol extracted and the CO2 extracted product?
So we're asking about market acceptability between ethanol and CO2 extraction. I think it's really brand-based there, sir. I think behind the product, a brand should be shining, and it's really dependent upon what those individuals choose. I would say it really depends on your formulation, but there will be little to very subtle differences in extraction outcomes. You'll have a concentrated CBD product from CO2. You'll have a concentrated CBD product from ethanol. And from there, how they're formulated will truly make what's behind there.
Who else has a question?
Asha Oroskar from Orochem. I was wondering if it's the right time that we can consider all of the anecdotal data as well as experimentation that we can plan in a forward-thinking way to be able to apply for GRAS certification for CBD, and that would possibly even address some of the questions regarding quality and dosage and food forms at this point. If you could both comment upon that.
I would prefer, because I know who's coming up here next, the lawyers that study this really well. I'm gonna punt to the attorneys on that.
That's a good idea.
Because they're gonna focus on that.
Thank you, though.
Have either of your companies been in contact with Facebook, Google, or Amazon to discuss if they're going to change their policy on marketing and selling CBD products on their platform?
No, sir. We have not gotten on the step, nor have we felt it necessary to really do that.
We've tried. We had people that we worked with that were Google partners that kind of put it up to the highest level. And from what I've heard is the same thing I hear from all of you. Everybody agrees with us. They're just going to wait until it's 100% legal before they get into the business. It's very, very simple. So we're in that transition period where we're trying to line up the law with our desire. And once we accomplish that, this will probably be the biggest market we've ever seen.
I just want to thank my friend Stewart. You did a great job again, as you always do. And the other thing I want to ask you, Stewart, is do you see isolate of being in any trouble more than full spectrum oil with government regulations?
Well, since the question is pointed directly at me, and I am not a lawyer, I would say that I do believe that 99% pure CBD, if it was just approved by the agency to treat treatment-resistant epilepsy, would make that a good question to ask one of the lawyers. That's radically different than a hemp extract that contains 10% cannabinoids and all this fatty acids and vitamin E and sterols and so forth. So I hope that answers the question. We are not comfortable with the isolates right now ourselves.
I'd like you to speak to the kind of the metrics of the money involved with the broad spectrum or an isolate. I'm seeing products that are marketed that claim a 500 milligram dose of something in a 30 ml bottle. They're selling it for $30. My product is about the same idea, but it's retail $99. how are they doing it for $30? I'm imagining it's the isolate, but I don't have all the facts on that. So is there any way of telling if it's an isolate and that's making it so cheap, or is
Well, you can ask for a certificate of analysis to prove that the isolate is carbon radio label tested not to be synthetic. That's the other issue with the isolates.
With the people on Amazon, some of you don't even know who they are.
Well, that's an issue.
They're anonymous.
So that's where the trust is replacing truth. That you find good actors that behave the right way, and then you mimic what they do.
Short appendix to that, Amazon blocked my merchant account.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Seized all my money with no reason. Mine is a broad spectrum product.
Yeah, but there's still a reason. This stuff isn't scheduled. Yeah.
And Google disallowed all my ads going to my website for krill oil, enzymes, probiotics, because the site also sold CBD. So when it is legalized, I want to punish them and not give them my product. But that's just me being sour.
You answered that.
Hi, I'm Pam Coleman with Mariu Nutrisciences. So I'm going to ask a science question. What role do you think clinical research is going to play in this industry?
I think the clinical research is going to walk across the gamut of this industry. We're engaged in clinical research in the United States and around the world with our products, and it's going to be a staple of industry data and industry-accompanied data as to where products accompanied with strong clinical data behind them. So it's happening. It's needed to happen. You know, we're a little bit behind in the Americas as far as clinical research compared to some of our friends in Europe and Israel, but it is being done and it is being effective.
I just want to add one quickie thing. It's tricky to get IRB exemption right now. I don't know, you sound like you're very familiar with the clinical research, so I understand the criticism that don't we need some clinical research, but we've still been ending on the regulatory side. So I just want to let you know that there are several companies that are doing work right now for structure function claims.
Transport of the samples themselves is actually, in my mind, as big an issue as the IRB. I think the IRB can be worked around, but the transport of samples is difficult.
Oh, you're 100% right. We're working with MDs doing clinical research. I think it's just a matter of time before this loosens up. But we're with you. That will be the big rate-limiting factor to be able to determine the future with these things.
Absolutely. There is an agency called the Industrial Hemp Research Foundation that's laid out some of the parameters to get your products into the hands of higher education and into the hands of clinicians for research.
Thank you. Najla Guthrie from KGK Science. Just to add on to that, we are located in Canada, and we are a CRO, and have been doing research on the in the cannabis field on CBD. We have a lot of studies going on and a lot of interest. And I would say a number of the studies have come from the U.S., and you are correct. There are some IRB issues in the U.S., so we're not able to place these studies with our partners in the U.S., but we are able to place them and conduct the studies in Canada. So there are no issues in Canada with the IRB. However, you're right, transfer of the research product, you can't do that yet, so we would have to get that manufactured in Canada and tested according to your protocol. Thank you.
Any questions back here? Okay. Oh, this gentleman raised his hand.
Thanks for the presentation, gentlemen. Question for you, Stewart. Ryan Bracken with Manitoba Harvest. Appreciate all the work you're doing as far as the self-affirmed GRAS submission is concerned. Do you plan on notifying the FDA?
We're doing more work. We're doing even more research. So the ultimate plan has not been cemented yet as to what we'll do with that, but we are not stopping with what we've done. We have some very exciting science we're doing to continually make the case over and over and over about its safety.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I don't see any more questions. This is your final chance before the 5-minute break. What do we got here? Let's reconvene at 2:45. Take a 10-minute break. Thanks.
Hey, thank you. It's great to share the stage with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, can everybody take a minute to get in their seats? We're going to get started in a minute or two. Thank you. All right, we're going to get started in 60 seconds. Thanks. What's that, Jim?
How are you going to introduce people?
I am going to, I'm going to introduce you one at a time like I did with those guys. Okay. And so this is the agenda. Bob, this guy named Jim Prochnow, do you know him? No. Okay, yeah, he's a good guy. Okay. Then Todd, then Ashish. So I'm just asking that you guys go about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to really keep it. I want to see what
you're DeShay, FTC compliance.
Yeah, I'm going to see what, just take 1 second.
But please talk about epidiolex, because everybody, that's a burning question, and you're the guy.
Okay? Oh, okay, good.
All right, guys, we're going to get started so you can get out of here on time. We have a lot of good speakers. No, stay down. So I have good news and bad news. The good news is you have a lot of regulatory and legal questions. We have 4 lawyers to answer those questions. The bad news is you need to get out your checkbooks right now. They're going to start billing at $500 an hour starting now. All right. Oh, Todd's 900. Sorry about that. Our first speaker is going to talk about the big bad DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, for those of you who haven't been arrested lately. Bob Hoban is managing partner of Hoban Law Group in Denver, Colorado. It is the nation's premier cannabis law firm with attorneys in more than a dozen states and abroad. Bob is recognized as one of the leading commercial cannabis practitioners nationwide. He represents private and publicly held clients in numerous states and internationally as well. He has litigated nearly every aspect of Colorado's marijuana code and has closed more than 300 marijuana-related business transactions. Marijuana and hemp-based business operations, related litigation, and regulatory counsel are his specialty. He's an AV preeminent rated attorney and seasoned full-service commercial practitioner. Bob, come on up. We look forward to hearing from you.
How are we doing now? All right, here we go. I was complimenting my brethren up here, the attorneys, and really excited to be a part of this panel and part of this discussion. I want to start at the beginning with this and just make sure we all understand that there's a fundamental baseline about what cannabis is. Tim touched on this. Cannabis is the plant species. Hemp, by definition, under federal and various state laws, means it's a plant within the cannabis species that has 0.3% or below THC. We got that? That's the psychoactive ingredient. Marijuana is anything that's above that. And actually, arguably, marijuana is below 0.3 hemp that hasn't been registered in a state-run program. So I want you to understand that it's one plant species. There's no hemp parts of the marijuana plant and marijuana parts of the hemp plant, although the law has evolved in a funky way. I also want to stress something that was said earlier. It's this notion of the 3 swim lanes, okay? Keep this in your mind, because this is what's happening in real time around us, not by accident, because the folks up here and so many folks in this audience and beyond have worked so hard to try to get a regulatory structure in place, because we want to be regulated. We, the industry, wants to be regulated. So you've got that cannabis-based medicine swim lane, okay? That's Epidiolex, that's GW Pharmaceutical, that's Pfizer, when they produce specific condition formulas run through a drug approval process. Different. Then you've got the middle lane, food and supplements. That's what we're here about. And most states' FDA equivalents don't make much of a distinction between food and supplements. But the FDA at the federal level certainly does, and you'll hear more about that. And then the third lane, and it doesn't concern us here, as Tim pointed out, is over-the-counter marijuana, state-specific marijuana. Let's not talk about that. But my point is, let's focus on the other two. Cannabis-based medicine on one hand, and nutraceuticals, natural products industry lane on the other hand. Because think about this. The Epidiolex product that was approved as a drug on behalf of Greenwich Biosciences, which is GW Pharma's US-based affiliate. It's basically the same thing that you'd buy on the shelves at a Lucky's Market. It's CBD with sesame oil and a few other compounds in there, naturally occurring compounds. What's different about that product than what's on the shelves at Lucky's Foods? Well, first and foremost, it's the potency, okay? And this is frankly where things we believe are going with the distinction between those two lanes. But you've got something I need to go to a doctor for. I got to go to a doc and I can say, Doc, I have a condition, or my friend or family member has a condition that fits this prescription, and I want to use that product for it. That's where you would go to get the medicine, and if not, and that's going to be 1,000, 3,000 milligrams. Whereas what you purchase in a store over the counter on the shelves of a Lucky's Market would probably be in the 50, 30, maybe even 50 milligram individual serving size doses. This remains to be seen, but I want you to think about that, because what is the line in the sand? What the heck is the difference between cannabis-based medicine that's FDA approved and a food and a supplement from a purpose of looking at the actual physical makeup of the product? So one line in the sand is potency. Will be potency. Another line in the sand has to do with what's natural and what's synthetically produced. Although what we've seen from the cannabis FDA-approved pharmaceutical producers to date is most of their materials have been naturally derived cannabinoids, which is interesting because that's not always the pharmaceutical company's pathway to a drug approval process. So it's just something interesting to watch. Now, I would further note that in Colorado, we were forward-looking. We looked at our FDA equivalent, our CDPHE, Department of Public Health and Environment, and we said, you can regulate these products and I can get a registration like I can for any other ag product to make a wholesale good. They said, no, this is marijuana. We said, it's not marijuana, it's hemp. Look at the legal difference. And they said, well, even if it's hemp, the FDA says that this is a controlled substance or an illegal product. We said, well, show us where they say that from hemp. They've never said that about CBD from hemp. They say that about CBD from marijuana. So show me the difference there. Show me the difference, and they did. They did their research, and they were policy agreeable was the way our lobbyists called it. They wanted to come to us and say, we want to help develop a policy. This was 2 years ago. So we developed a policy not to treat cannabinoid extracts from legal state-grown or state authorized industrial hemp. We created a program where that material was treated like corn or any other ag product extracted, produced in a consumer protective environment and registered with our FDA equivalent at the state level. That was the first state to do that. Frankly, to date, it's the only state to do this, which is interesting. We put it out there. We said, these are the two lanes. We can show you that this one lane works really, really well. And the FDA has been in Colorado for 6 of the last 8 weeks, studying with our CDPHE, anticipating the 2018 Farm Bill passing, which I'll get to in a few moments. So these are some things to think about how we're missing the regulatory void. You talk about under-regulated market. It is, because the companies are expected to voluntarily comply with the tenets of the DSHEA Act or other consumer standards that exist at the state levels for the FDA equivalents. but it's never been affirmatively pursued. So when the CDPHE said that, and they did that by policy, it was later adapted as a statute, and the FDA just hired the woman from Colorado who headed that sub-program within the CDPHE. You can't read the tea leaves on these things. You don't know what that means. But what I do think that means, and based on the rhetoric we're hearing from within, is that that is a model that they're looking closely at, and it seems to be in the lead. This model that you would have medicine and supplements that are largely the same thing with some sort of dividing line between the two. And of course, those medicinal formulas are tendered for a specific condition, and the food and supplements would not be. So that's where I wanted to start. But I also want to take you back a little bit further. To give you a present-day picture of the law surrounding industrial hemp, I just want to say that in 1917, who remembers the Harrison Act? Nobody remembers the Harrison Act from 1917. The Harrison Act, for the first time in federal law, defined something called marijuana. It defined marijuana with an H, marijuana, as a controlled substance, okay? And it wasn't a controlled substance in 1917. It was rather just a narcotic, because they didn't have the Controlled Substances Act yet until the 70s. But the same definition continued on. And the definition didn't define cannabis as being an illegal product, meaning let's take that speaker. That's the top of that plant is flowers and leaves and sticky resin, stalks leading down to roots. The Controlled Substances Act, and ultimately that 1917, 1914 definition, was not that the entire cannabis plant was a controlled substance, but rather the resins, the sticky parts of the plant, number one. Number two, the flowers, the leaves, the high stems that had lots of resin on them. The bottom part, that's always been recognized in some form or fashion as industrial hemp, but never defined thereas. Because industrial hemp was a major cash crop worldwide, and certainly around the United States, into the 40s with our revived Hemp for War, Hemp for Victory campaign. After 1937, we made the plant for its industrial uses and for its psychoactive uses all into one called marijuana and made into a controlled substance. So then, spinning that forward, case in 2004 where the Hemp Industries Association steps up and says, you know, our clients are selling nuts and soap made from hemp seed oil. Different concept altogether, a different kind of oil. You all know that, or you should. Another fundamental concept, if you don't know the difference between a hemp seed oil and a cannabinoid-rich hemp oil, please understand that before you make 3 calls and start white labeling these products and putting them on the shelves. So this concept of what happened back in 2004 was that those pieces of the exempted parts of the plant, the seeds, the stalks, they still had trace amounts of cannabinoids on them. And the federal government said, well, they're cannabinoids, so they're illegal. And the court commented and said, well, the only definition we have is this marijuana definition. And it only makes a certain part of this plant illegal. So if there's cannabinoids that come out of the exempted parts of the plant, in that case, seed, which is not viable seed, if it comes from the stalk, then that's a legal product because it didn't come from a controlled substance. Therefore, we have something that began as the source rule. Whether you can extract appreciable amounts of cannabinoids from the stalk or the seeds, that's not my debate. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a processor. I'm simply a lawyer. I've been told that you can on a mass scale, but that's not the debate for today because something really wonderful happened in 2014. In 2014, the Agricultural Act of 2014 was passed, known as the Farm Bill. Google this. If you haven't read it, read it because it's present-day law and it's very short. And frankly, I think it was written by non-lawyers, so non-lawyers can certainly understand it. Section 7606 of the Farm Bill. Read it. It's short. It says that the federal government has effectively authorized states through their departments of ag or institutions of higher learning to grow industrial hemp defined as less than 0.3% THC by dry weight, meaning by the plant material, dry weight standard, plant material standard. States, you can go out and do this. And it's not a violation of federal law if you do. For one of 3 research purposes, scientific, agricultural, and market-based research. Didn't say go out and create a commercial industry, but it said market-based research. So the state of Kentucky sued the DEA, the Department of Justice, and asserted that if Congress intended for us to have legal plant material from industrial hemp for market-based research, there needs to be a market, and a stipulation was reached with the DEA accordingly. Subsequent to that 24 enactment, and that case I just talked about, which was early 2015, the DEA doesn't like the fact that Congress is taking industrial hemp out of its purview for whatever variety of reasons, whether that's budgetary, whether that's the fact that cannabis has always been associated with violent crimes and things that the DEA has to do, that's, things we can't even imagine. But at the end of the day, they don't like it, or they appear not to like it, because it's taken 4 consecutive appropriations acts from Congress to say, basically slap the DEA's hand back. Imagine that. Imagine your kid reaching for the cookie plate before he's finished eating the real meal. You can't have any pudding before you have unless you have your meat. He smacks it. They said, well, you can't do that. If this is Farm Bill hemp, meaning legal at the federal level, through the state's enactment of a program or otherwise, then you can't do this, and they're refrained from doing so from a budgetary perspective. So spin that forward even further. In 2018, this past May, we got a decision in a case where our client, the HIA, sued the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, and said, in the basis of this, I won't get into the nuances, but it was a drug code rule that said any cannabinoid extract that comes out of marijuana or cannabis is a marijuana extract. It was not a scheduling action, not even close. It was a record-keeping function because registrants with the DEA, doctors, researchers, hospitals, universities, they can order controlled substances and do research with a 4-digit drug code. So this was the DEA, quote-unquote, on paper at least, trying to create a drug code that was to track the use of cannabinoid extracts in the United States. But they called it marijuana extract. So we said, well, why are you saying that any extract that comes out of cannabis is illegal when cannabis isn't illegal, but rather marijuana is, remember? Plus, we had this thing happen in 2014 called the Farm Bill, and it was a seismic shift in cannabis policy in the United States. It created a whole category of cannabis and made it federally legal and authorized that to the states. So that's what happened, and the court agreed, and it said that that Farm Bill, the definition of hemp, preempts, and courts don't throw the word preempts around loosely. It preempts the Controlled Substances Act, preempts it. So then the only question is, what is Farm Bill compliant hemp? And many of us have done our best on behalf of clients and on behalf of the industry to paint that picture. And Farm Bill compliant hemp doesn't just exist by having a registration with the state and from the point you put it in the ground to the time you harvest it, but it comes to the FDA pieces, the pieces afterwards. When you harvest that plant material, who governs, permits, authorizes the production of the oils or anything, frankly, that comes out of that plant material and goes into a human body? That was the missing piece, and we see that happening. And we see that the Farm Bill of 2018 making it eminently clear that, to Tim's point, the baton is being passed from the DEA to the FDA, and that is something that keeps me up at night a little bit, and we'll hear a little bit more from some of the fine attorneys in front of me about this topic on a micro level. But the DEA will effectively be required to cede authority to the USDA for that cultivation portion and to the FDA and its state equivalents in enforcing that at the production side. So that's the state of the law as we sit here today. The FDA doesn't come out and say that CBD is an approved ingredient. It doesn't come out and say that it's anything, frankly, than an adulterant at this point in time. But that's because it's taking the DEA's direction, and the DEA's direction has been skewed. I just want to make a couple notes and then pass it off to my fellow colleagues here. Epidiolex, I'm sure we'll get into a little bit further, but Epidiolex, just like the marijuana code extract that I talked about, the marijuana extract code I talked about a moment ago, Epidiolex didn't schedule CBD. Epidiolex became a Schedule V substance, and an ingredient within it was a marijuana derivative, which is already scheduled as marijuana. So that formula became a Schedule V approved substance. CBD, once again, was not scheduled. CBD, nor any other cannabinoid besides THC, the psychoactive compound, none of them are identified in the Controlled Substances Act. And to Tim's point earlier, there's something called the Analog Act. If this doesn't produce the same effects of a controlled substance, or if it's not derived from a controlled substance, or if it's not specifically identified as a controlled substance, then guess what it's not? It's not a controlled substance. So that's the state of the law today. What's murkier and perhaps unclear is what we're going to get into. It's how the FDA is going to deal with this, should deal with this, and where this fits under existing regulatory structure, and how those pieces fit together going forward. And one last note I would make is that retailers, I represent a number of large retailers. We go to retailers on behalf of clients, and we're devising strategies for them. But here's the biggest holdup in the CBD distribution industry, if you will, from a retail perspective. It's not the fact that it's, well, certainly there's a stigma associated with it. Don't make a mistake about that. But that's not what's holding them up right now. What's holding them up right now is if we picked 50 best-of-breed brands and we put them in a national rollout, put 50 units side by side, when those 50 units are sold, those companies are going to have an extremely difficult time replacing those 50 units with the same quality, consistent material. That's the market problem, I would suggest, not so much the illegality, but that's something that we can dive into this afternoon. And that's what the retailers see, because they don't want Company X going out and just buying any oil off the market. They want to see certified seed from their producers over and over and over again for years and years and years, more than they can possibly use, so that creates a consistent product in the branding. So with that said, I'm going to stop and pass the baton from the legality components to the regulatory components. And Josh, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. That was great. So we talked about the DEA, and Bob has great experience there. Now we're going to talk about the FDA, and our next esteemed speaker is Jim Prochnow, a shareholder at Greenberg Traurig. He concentrates his practice on FDA and FTC advice and related litigation. He counsels clients about food and drug regulatory law, with an emphasis on dietary supplements and cosmetics, among other products. Other areas of interest include advising on safe and aggressive marketing without violating advertising laws and defense of enforcement actions, including warning letters. And this is just a note, hopefully he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Jim worked for the Nixon White House. So someday you could probably have an interesting conversation with him off the record. Thanks, Jim.
Now you let the cat out of the bag. Yes, I did turn 75 a month ago. And I look young. I want to start out by saying, because Kentucky's CBD area. Come here and help me out. Okay, I need to tell you in advance, because Kentucky's a hotbed for hemp, that I'm a big Duke Blue Devil basketball fan. And last night, Duke beat Kentucky 117-82 to start the season. I wanted to let you know that I'm going to talk here for a few minutes, and then Todd Harrison and others are going to talk about different facets of this. I'm going to focus on the use of hemp in food products. To be a trial lawyer with the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., where the FDA was a client. Of course, that was decades ago. But nonetheless, the way I look at the law, Bob and I have a different opinion on some of the applications.
Do you have that?
You want to do that? Okay, we're good. Without going into much detail, Bob Hoban is a fellow colleague from Colorado, and we have a different opinion about the state of the law that governs CBD and hemp. I'm not saying Bob's wrong. I'm just telling you we have a difference of opinion about that. Fundamentally, and I'm not here on behalf of the Department of Justice or the DEA, but fundamentally, my view is that the hemp bill, or excuse me, the Farm Bill of 2014 did not preempt or at all affect the Controlled Substances Act. My view is rather simple. I look at the plain language of the acts, both of the Agricultural Act of 2014 and of the Controlled Substances Act, and reach the conclusion that industrial hemp is indeed defined in a very specific way by the Farm Bill, but it doesn't affect the Controlled Substances Act in any respect. It's for that reason, and there's a legitimate difference of opinion about this, is that there's a great deal of uncertainty in the banking system and in the business system, because frankly, the Department of Justice, which is the enforcement arm of the federal government, DEA is a part of the Department of Justice, basically believe, and their strong opinion is, that the Farm Bill of 2014 does not at all affect the Controlled Substances Act. That's why we still have a lot of DEA involvement in interference with shipments of CBD interstate. I too hope, and I know it will happen, that either in the Farm Bill for 2018 or in other separate legislation that may be necessary, that indeed an official definition of industrial hemp that exempts industrial hemp from the Controlled Substances Act takes place. I just want to make that point clear because there's always room for disagreement, and there's a huge disagreement about the effect of the Farm Bill right now. So what I want to talk about is what I know most about, and that is the application of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to CBD and hemp products. The reason why this is important is that most of the people in the audience here are either going to be manufacturing, or are either growing hemp biomass, or they're going to be manufacturing it as a toll manufacturer or contract manufacturer, or are going to be selling it as a distributor, as a retail. But the question then is, what are you selling? Fundamentally, most of the parties in this audience are going to be connected with the food industry. So when we have the food industry, we got to decide how hemp or CBD fits in with that. For the present time, I'm not going to distinguish between hemp and CBD. That, as Bob Hoban pointed out, is another issue, because hemp is not really defined by the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act or by the Controlled Substances Act, separate apart from the definition of marijuana. But it isn't important for my part of the presentation that we get involved in the nuts and bolts of the differences between it. Essentially right now is this. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which is governed by the FDA, controls every aspect of the use of CBD or hemp, either as a dietary ingredient in some sort of food product or in its finished product itself. The biggest, and one of the speakers alluded to this, and maybe both of the business lawyers did, the biggest challenge that I see for this industry, and for all of you seated in this room, because I know the DEA and the definitions are going to be worked out sometime soon, is you have to comply with the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, or it could lead to bad consequences for you until either a new DEA-related law is passed or even in the future. Because fundamentally, what the FDA is saying and the DEA is saying right now is this: we're probably going to leave you alone under most circumstances if you follow the basic core law for which your product is being sold. So it's essential, it's imperative that all of you understand the provisions of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. This isn't going to be a 25-minute primer on the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, but I want to bring up a couple of the provisions that you need to pay attention to. Probably one of the major provisions that you need to pay attention to is what you call your product. Whether you are sending in interstate commerce, where we all know there's some, let's say, trepidation to do so, but if you're doing that, or on the label of your product, you have to be very accurate what you say. You have to be accurate what you say because it's a felony, a violation of federal law to be untruthful about what's in the product. And I know there's in good faith attempts to make sure your products don't get confiscated by the UPS or by the DEA or by state law enforcement authorities, as happened last week, probably because of the a mislabeling of a product. But you need to be accurate about that from the standpoint of being fair to consumers, complying with the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and avoiding criminal violations. In my experience, and I defend a lot of FTC and FDA investigations, civil and criminal, is this: the government gets its hair really long and up on its back if you don't tell the truth, but if you lie. There's always room for dispositions of things by making mistakes, by not listing the right name of the ingredient. But the government has little tolerance for untruthful statements. So please keep that in mind. So when I advise people, as the rest of these lawyers do, about how to comply with the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, keep in mind that, of course, you all know what the label of the product looks like. So you know that there's a lot of kind of nitpicking regulations that you have to follow. But let's talk about a couple of the major items that are involved. First of all, as I said, you've got to decide what you're really selling, and you have to be accurate about it. The second thing is you got to decide, why are you selling the product? Every product that's sold as a food product is sold for a purpose. Maybe it's for the taste, maybe it's for the aroma, maybe it's for a nutritional value, or maybe it's because there's a real good claim that you can make for that. Under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, it's simple. You cannot sell a product, whether it's CBD, hemp, or for that matter, ginkgo, that's where the intended purpose is to treat, cure, diagnose, or prevent a disease. I may have missed one in there, but that's it. So no matter what. So when I talk with people in this industry about what they're selling the product for, number one is they don't really know, but they know if they sell it as CBD, it'll be a seller. But as a matter of fact, keep this in mind. When the FDA, whether they're civil or criminal prosecutors looking at things, they look to the label of the product and your website. In fact, website is more important than the label of the product, virtually, because there's no prior registration with the government for food products. So what they do is have software packages, both the FTC and the FDA, and they scan websites for claims that are obviously illegal. So what can you say about CBD or hemp that's legal? You can tell your customers, the consuming public, anything that you want to about it, as long as it's true and it's got support with science and it doesn't affect a disease. How about CBD for helping to improve eyesight or to maybe help with reducing a normal memory absent impairment as one grows older, a normal aging process. So the fact of the matter is you've got to establish a purpose for your product. And I know all of you out there. I'm a marketing person at heart, as all of you. So you're going to have a website that's going to say something about why you're selling your product. Now, so you got to be very careful about that. It can't be for treating pain unless it's real temporary pain. It's a kind of a sophisticated area, so you should really see some good regulatory people or lawyers about that. So basically, once you establish what the claim is for, the biggest challenge probably in this industry is what Stewart and others talked about, and that is you got to have adequate and competent, reliable science to support your claims. What does that mean? The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, the Federal Trade Commission, the FDA, do not require a clinical test, that is a human test of 30 subjects, for example, to support a claim. However, that's the best way to approach things. The answer simply is this: how strong is your science to support your claim that CBD helps with eyesight, for example? Now, since most of the companies here haven't done clinical trials, there's nothing wrong with looking at the literature to see what's support for your trials. However, most companies get into big trial because they have a marketing department person looking at a study about eyesight or about CBD, and there's no effort to compare
the ingredient, for example, the CBD molecule in the study, without actually what's in your product, or 200 milligrams versus 200 milligrams. So what I'm saying is this: identify your product, identify the claim, make sure you have good science to support it. Two more things before I quit, and I don't know if Ashish or Todd is the next one, but I want to make these points because it came up before. What's this business about grass, and what's this business about new dietary ingredients? Now, this audience is unique because grass means something to everybody a little differently here. We know what grass could mean, marijuana. But when I'm using grass, for right now, I'm saying it's an acronym for generally recognized as safe. There is a drug acronym very close that's GRASE, generally recognized as safe and effective. But I'm saying grass right now. What the law really requires is this: if you're selling CBD that's in a product, or the product's being sold, that's not a dietary supplement, but is a food product like a beverage, for example, all ingredients in the product need to either be a food additive, which is something tough to get through the FDA, or it's got to have GRAS status, as actually was done for CBD by CV Sciences. That means that you have to hire or have good, strong scientific evidence, affirmed by a panel of experts, that in fact your ingredient is going to be safe in the product for whatever use you're intending with the product. It's a big hurdle. Now, when we switch to dietary supplements, which are food products usually in a capsule form, tablet, powder, or something like that, then there's no more concept of GRAS. That's a non-factor. But then you have to file something what's called a new dietary ingredient dossier with the FDA that tells the FDA why your product is safe. Doesn't have to be approved, but you have to do it. So there are some of these hurdles I want you to think about as we move forward. The last thing that I'm going to talk about here, which was somewhat raised before, and that is this business about this, I'll call it the draconian clause, part of the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. There's an acronym that's been used before, DSHEA. DSHEA means Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994. It was marvelous, kind of revolutionary, that made the dietary supplement industry what it is. However, that act, which is a part of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, has a despicable provision, and I feel strongly about this, that says this: if an ingredient, and they actually call it an article in the definition, but it's the same as a substance, was first authorized for use in a drug trial or drug trials, it can never be used in a food or dietary supplement. Now, that is the law. So the question is, well, what do we do about that in light of the fact that we have Epidiolex here, which was, in fact, authorized for study CBD? And it does present a challenge for this industry. There are 2 or 3 solutions to that. One is to change the law, and maybe as a part of a package for the industrial hemp provision that we talked about as a part of the Farm Bill, or a separate legislative piece of legislation, that law can be repealed, or, as I have suggested, and Todd has at various forums, that we expand it to give some protection to a drug company if they put a lot of effort and money into it, but it's only good for 3 or 4 years, and then it can be used in a food product. Or, right now, the FDA nor GW Pharmaceuticals has challenged companies that, in fact, are using CBD in their product on the basis of this, what I'll call the exclusionary provision, which enforced would fundamentally end the CBD industry. So what do you do about that in the absence of any legislation? Well, one of the answers is this: is the article that you're selling, is the substance that you're actually selling the same substance that Epidiolex was as approved by the FDA? Second of all, there are other nuanced arguments, but that's the main argument. That's the main substantive argument. And it's a good argument, but it hasn't been tested in court yet. So it leaves everybody in a state of uncertainty when we have a law that's very explicit on its face. But so far, fundamentally, the industry, as one of the first speakers, or the two business speakers said, the industry is moving along and sort of putting the law to the side. And in recognition of the fact that nobody has done anything about this, companies have done very well despite this very significant impediment about us being able to issue legal opinions about whether it's legal to sell CBD in light of that provision. So are there ways to deal with it right now? I would say from my overall perspective, one last thing to take care of from a food standpoint when we talk about things is we also have to deal with this issue of, I'm going to talk about something else, and there's another, I just thought of it. There's a type of a food called a medical food. And I would suggest that all of you go home tonight, look in Google and see what the definition of medical food is. Because a medical food is a special type of formulated food that is specially formative to meet distinctive nutritional requirements for a disease that the general food can't meet. And of course, medical foods, you can talk about diseases that supplements can't talk about diseases. It's not a drug to cure a disease, but to provide special requirements, special things that are lacking in the general food supply. Given what CBD is and its potential benefits, I suggest it's one of these innovative things to think about as we move forward. At this point, I'm not going to talk anything more. I'm going to, whoever the next speaker is going to be, but just suggest to you that this industry will, I think it's going to be viable, it's going to be robust, but just remember, in addition to all of this hullabaloo about the DEA, it's the fundamental compliance with the food law that you should be most involved with as you move forward. Thanks very much.
That was an amazing presentation. I always appreciate hearing Jim Prochnow. Our next speaker, I guess he has the highest billable rate, so I don't know if that's good or bad, is Todd Harrison. He's with Venable. He chairs the firm's Food and Drug Practice Group and co-chairs its Dietary Supplements, Functional Foods, and Cosmetics Group. He has a practice that focuses on federal, state, and international consumer protection agencies, governing rules and regulations related to drugs, supplements, foods, homeopathic remedies, medical devices, cosmetics, and medical foods. He works extensively in food and dietary supplement safety, labeling and advertising claims, opinion letters regarding the status of food ingredients in the U.S., preparation of food additive petitions, GRAS, generally recognized as safe, as Jim said, and new dietary ingredient notifications and compliance issues. I asked Todd to talk about an issue that we're all worried about, and that is Fda enforcement, which Jim just alluded to. I wanted to talk about what FDA has done so far in terms of enforcement and what he thinks the agency is going to do moving forward and how you can mitigate your risk. So, Todd, come on up.
Well, I'll just start that I am expensive, but I'm worth it. Thank you for coming today. Jim and I have had long conversations about CBD for almost going on 2 years now. And there are some fundamental differences on the Farm Bill that we have with the other lawyers on the panel. The Farm Bill does not take it out of the control substance. 2018 case that just came down, actually the Ninth Circuit agreed that it wasn't preempted and that DEA's definition was not in contradiction of the act. That's why there's a 2018 act. The 2018 act will take care of the controlled substance issue. It'll be done. However, there is a poison pill in that act, and that poison pill is you have to follow the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. They are going to state and make it clear that FDA's rules are not going to be preempted under this. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in a position that we have an agency
that, takes its time. It's slow. It's lumbering. It takes forever to do any type of enforcement action. Let's be honest here. It is, let's see, the act was in 1994, and we still only have a draft guidance on new dietary ingredients. This is the agency we deal with. It is how they think. They take things slow, especially if there's no safety issue. So they're willing to send out warning letters. And believe me, every warning letter they have just about sent out on CBD has said CBD is not permitted. They have not altered their course. My discussions with the agency has been similar. We will not back down on CBD isolate. So that's where we're coming at. So where are we going? Well, at some point, GW Pharma may not like all these CBD products out on the market and may start pushing FDA to take enforcement action. Or GW Pharma gets sold to Big Pharma because GW Pharma is small pharma. And Big Pharma is not likely to sit back and allow a market to develop just to develop. So we have to start looking at ways around this. How do we get there? In my opinion, the fight's coming. So we might as well get up and geared up for it now and take the fight to the agency. I've been a big proponent of that. And we start with hemp extracts, real hemp extracts. I'm not talking about standardized extracts. I'm talking about extracts that are truly full spectrum. If Jim alluded that you gotta be truthful in your labeling. If you're 80% CBD and you're saying you're a hemp extract, you're misbranded your product because you're CBD from hemp, not hemp extract. So these are things that you have to learn, and that's the easy one for FDA. They're calling them hemp, but it's really CBD. So that's one way they can enforce it. So we go there and we file whether we want to do it as a new dietary ingredient notification, whether we want to do it as a petition to FDA to authorize its use in the food supply and as a dietary supplement. These are all options that are open and on the table. And it makes sense because, if you take the fight to the agency is going to take a step back. And they're going to have to consider it. And they're going to have to look at it. And guess what? That takes time. And if the one thing I've ever learned about the FDA, it takes time. I remember when I was a young associate, we had a client that was selling animal drugs, and they were done by regulation. And FDA set out a rule that said, a proposed rule that they were going to get rid of the regulations. And my partner at the time said, we have to call FDA up. We called FDA up, and he knew the head of CVM very well at the time, and he said, Ed, we have one of two choices here. You can push your issue with me on trying to get a regulation, or you can do what it'll take us 25 years to finalize. So my point is that if we file it, it's going to take them time. It will take them probably 3 to 5 years at a minimum. FDA doesn't do anything quickly. The risk you take by not doing that is that the agency gets pushed by Big Pharma, gets pushed by GW to do something. And where does that leave us? Well, everybody familiar with red yeast rice? We all know the dirty little secret about red yeast rice in the marketplace, but does everybody know about the red yeast rice, the clustering case back in the early 2000s? It's a very interesting case because they had manipulated the manufacturing process to increase a trace level of ingredient, a constituent in red yeast rice, to increase its level of lovastatin in there. FDA took them to court, and they won because they were standardizing to the lovastatin. Can't standardize the CBD. You can make the extract. If the hemp plant has 10% CBD in it, that's what it should have. It should have no more than 10% in there. If the hemp extract is a 5% one, that's what it should be. If you come up with a new cultivar that's at 25%, you know, FDA might have an issue with that. But that's how you deal with these issues. Engage the agency in this. Have an open dialogue with them. But everybody's out here marketing a product that could easily be gone in 3 to 5 years. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure that if I knew I had 3 to 5 years, I wouldn't market it myself. But I'm a lawyer, so I don't do things like that because I'm too conservative for it. But you could do that. I understand wanting to upset the apple cart, that we get so many things going and everybody up in arms that the law is going to change. That's how DSHEA came about. But it didn't help the industry with ephedra. FDA decided they were going to ban ephedra. They did. It took them 5 years to do it, but they banned it. So these are the things you're dealing with on a broad scope with FDA. But FDA just doesn't have their tools. They have states that will do their bidding. We already have the state of California somehow deciding that CBD is a controlled substance, but marijuana is not. I'm not sure if I understand their position, but okay, maybe they smoke too much grass. Then you have local DAs in California who may be looking at this and go after companies. But there's another very scary bar out there. It's called the plaintiff bar. And the new thing with the plaintiff's bar is they are starting to sue companies because they're making impermissible claims or marketing ingredients that are not FDA approved or that are subject to FDA notification and have been notified. They're scary because they're not going to stop at $10,000 or $50,000. They're going to see those big numbers we saw earlier today, and they're going to say, I can get $100 million out of that industry. They're serious. And they are, every time we get a new CLRA letter from these lawyers, they are expanding on what they believe is a deceptive trade practice. Because while there's no private right of action under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, every state Deceptive Trade Practices Act makes it a deceptive trade practice, which is what a business would be doing, for violation of any law. And the courts are entertaining these lawsuits. So you got to take a step back and think, what's the long-term consequences? Because it's not just FDA you have to worry about. And we won't, Jim alluded to it, you have to worry about the Federal Trade Commission too if you're making claims. Other than, with seizures, I'm not sure if there's a lot of studies that support CBD yet in humans. It's a good anti-inflammatory. And I'll leave you with one last thought. There's a lot of compounds in CBD, in hemp. Look at CBDA. CBDA is the precursor. It's really the predominant cannabinoid in hemp. Actually, how many people think marijuana has THC in it? Do you know you're all wrong? It's THCA. Until you light it, it doesn't become THC. There's always some small decarboxylation of the CBDA done in the plant naturally, but the predominant one is CBDA. CBDA is not the article that was approved as a drug. CBD was. Now, FDA would try to argue that, well, they're the same. But FDA would never allow you to rely on the Epidiolex studies to get a drug approval on epilepsy, even though you show bioequivalency. They would say because of CBDA, you have to do a new clinical trial. FDA cannot have their cake and eat it too on that issue. So there are some precursors that you should look at. CBDA is hard to stabilize, but you can stabilize it. These are possible ways around the issue of CBD. It's also just as good an anti-inflammatory as CBD, probably has similar benefits, so you should look at it. But there's also CBDG, there's so many different cannabinoids in there that you could look at. So it's not totally precluded. That's why I'm a fan of the full spectrum. I think I can make those arguments credibly to the agency. And I also know the agency has not taken a position on the truly full spectrum extracts. Their mind is open on that. That's one place we do agree. They are open on the full spectrum, if it's true full spectrum. They're not going to want to see it being standardized, though. But in the end, I think that we file it. Otherwise, at some point, I don't know whether it's going to be FDA-driven. I don't know whether it's going to be plaintiff-driven. I don't know if it's going to be pharma-driven. But at some point, somebody's going to step back and say, I'm losing money. And, you know, we talked about greed. We all know greed is good. You know, remember that movie from back in the 1980s, Greed is Good? Well, pharma's going to get greedy at some point. And they may push it. Allergan went after Latisse a few years back. Allergan owned Latisse, and they went after those companies that were doing the peptides for the eye. One of their effective strategies was to get those products off the market. One of their causes of action was they were marketing an unapproved new drug. So they can use it as well. So if you think you're just relying on GW's good fortune and they're nice, I'll remind you one other thing. GW Pharma's general counsel wrote a very interesting article about 4 years ago and went through the whole process of how they would remove the ingredient off the marketplace. It was all about CBD as a dietary supplement. And he made it clear that they don't believe that it can be marketed as a dietary ingredient. Outside of that, you know, lawyers are bummers. But I do believe that, for the most part, while we have differences in some of the things around the edges, we agree on a lot of things. And there are some other arguments we could throw out there if the FDA comes out, like, you know, it was legally marketed in the 1930s. You know, the law doesn't say when it was legally marketed. Those are things you could throw out there as a defense. I don't know if they'd stick. I'd like to try that. It would be fun. I might find a judge on grass and be able to win that case. But anyway, so thank you very much, and I'm done for the day.
Todd, that was awesome. Thanks a lot. So our final topic, we're going to talk about state-by-state regulations. I've been covering this industry for 4.5 years now, well, more than that, but CBD. And I love it when I see a website and it says, CBD is legal in all 50 states, period. And I'm like, well, what the hell have I been writing about for the last 4 years? So the next speaker, Ashish Talati, is going to talk about the states. It's really an interesting dynamic because you take a state like Indiana, one of the most conservative states in the nation, they passed a hemp extract law. And then California, which was the first state in the country to pass a medical marijuana law in the 1990s, says you can't sell CBD in food. So the laws are all over the place, and our next speaker is going to talk about that. Ashish Talati is a partner with Min Talati Ubadi. He helps clients navigate food, beverage, dietary supplement, drug, cosmetic, and medical device regulations. He primarily counsels on regulatory compliance, anticipating issues in business operations to strategic planning, and advocating on clients' behalf before FDA and other federal agencies, as well as in court. He works with companies worldwide as an advisor at every step of the product life cycle, including product formulation, safety, efficacy studies, ongoing marketing and sales, and he's successfully filed many new dietary ingredient notifications with FDA and written extensively on the topic. Ashish Talati, come on up.
So we have 4 different attorneys, high billing rates, and 4 different opinions. Maybe the fine print says no refund at the end. You know, so Jim disagrees with Bob. I disagree with Todd. We can go on and on. But the bottom line is we're all in this space. You know, our firm, we got into it about 6 years ago, in 2012, when some of the new products were coming to market. And at that time, we looked into it, and some of the issues that are just coming up and are being highlighted, we try to figure out how to address them. But some of that, we'll take into, when you have Q&A, I'll address some of those questions. Today, one of the things besides FDA and DEA, the questions that we get all the time is different states. Can I sell in California? Can I sell in Indiana, Florida? What happens if I do interstate, shipping? Those are practical questions that affect a lot of the companies today. And what the advice that we give to our clients, it's certainly not black and white, but it's nuanced in the context that what we put it is the context of speeding. If the speed limit is 50, you as a company should certainly agree that you will never go under 50 if you're in the business of hemp CBD. Then the next thing is, are you going at 90 miles an hour or 55 miles an hour on a 50-mile zone? And that's where a practicality comes into play. You see a lot of the companies, some of the biggest players, the question earlier was private equity, multinationals. They're all looking at this space. They're seeing something. They see the same legal issues, but they see also business side of it. So what's the practical way of handling some of the issues? On the state side, I think we have Ren, who was a former associate chief counsel for CRN, and she spent dozens and dozens of hours. So Ren, are you here somewhere? Okay, so Ren has put together a great list of states, and at the end, if you have time, if you can talk to her about how we can give you our chart on different states and their regulations. There are about 12 states, and I'll give you those names, and there could be a few more, but the 12 states that have gone on the record to basically have an opinion on CBD. They have said something as to like California, where the California Department of Public Health put out a statement that they don't consider CBD in foods, and they define it broadly, but I think they were focused mostly on the food side, but they do cover supplements. But we're not seeing that much of an enforcement. The enforcement that we're primarily seeing across all 50 states, and primarily in those 12 or 14 states, is at the retail level and at the individual consumer level. So some of the consumers are being pulled over and they find a bottle of CBD. The product gets tested, and now they get charged with a felony or some other state statute violation. At the retail level, we're seeing on and off in different states. We just heard in Florida there was a CBD shop that got raided by the local police, and some of the products were taken. And so every now and then we get those different state enforcement actions. But to our knowledge, we have not seen any enforcement at a company level where a company has been put out of business or at least charged with any crime. There's a lot of it at the individual retail level and at the consumer level, and primarily because there is a lot of misinformation out there. So in terms of some of the states, primarily we're seeing a lot of the action in Iowa, Missouri, Wyoming, Michigan, Idaho, Nebraska, North Carolina, Texas, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And you can get a list of all of this at the end if you give your contact information to Ren. But some of those states, and then the next level of enforcement we're seeing is at the county level. So some county in Alabama says they don't like CBD, they think it's illegal, and they're going to enforce. When we look at all the record and any enforcement action, we don't really find any, perhaps maybe a store or two, and then the lobbyist contacts the state or the attorney general, and some of the charges are being dropped. So there is a lot of misinformation. The issues are real. Some of the retailers are getting affected, but nothing on a wholesale state level. If you look at Texas, they put out a statement. Michigan puts out a statement. Ohio has something similar, but nothing widespread in terms of enforcement. That doesn't mean it may not happen, but at least so far at the different state levels. So one state, Indiana, actually put out a statement that it's not legal, and then 6 months later, they passed a bill to make it legal. So Indiana is one of the only states where it's actually legal. They go on the record. If you comply with some of the testing and labeling requirements, you can certainly sell hemp CBD product in Indiana. And then any other states, California, I'll touch on it a little more, primarily because it's the biggest market. In California, we also represent the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, and on behalf of the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, we put out a letter. I know Bob Hoban's group has already also submitted a letter to them, basically disagreeing with this position that California has taken. Certainly California has taken that position, but there's, again, no enforcement. I know FDA is pretty slow, but usually states, if they want to enforce, they have the resources to do it pretty fast. I think that they're not enforcing it because they're also watching the market, and certainly there is no safety concerns. So I think and I'll be happy to take questions along with the panel, but we'll be happy to share the list of states that if anyone's interested later. Yeah.
So this is when we have, we're going to have all six gentlemen come on up, and we're going to have a Q&A with everybody. So if you have a burning question, now's your chance. But we'll give them a minute to come up on the stage, turn on their mics. Can you guys turn on your mics?
There we go.
All right, guys, here we go.
Thank you. Carl Germano, 37-year-old veteran in this industry, and I know all of you up there and respect all of you. I would have hoped that the title of this talk today was Phytocannabinoids in Hemp Extracts, as we move away from a scientific standpoint that CBD is just one of many, and a lot of the many are being studied right now. So why aren't we focusing on the class of compounds? How do we move forward? One of the things that I think about is the fact that when we look at states that have restrictions, when we look at DEA's questionable position before new laws get passed, and as we look at the Deshay law, that one of the basic concepts of the law is if an ingredient hasn't been in commerce prior to 1994, it can't be grandfathered as a dietary supplement. CBD certainly wasn't in commerce prior to 1994. Hemp oil was from various parts of the plant, so we're good there on the food level, hemp oil being a food ingredient. And then we looked at the red yeast rice that was brought up, the same issue. We look at even olive oil in the supermarket being high in various compounds like oleoropine and tyrosol and what have you. So why aren't we focusing on probably a much bigger story about this whole class of compounds, phytocannabinoids, rather than a single magic bullet approach of which pharma is notorious for? The other thing is the efficacy behind CBD. While it's absolutely efficacious, has great studies, it's only half the story in terms of its ability to support CB1 receptors. But what about the CB2 receptors? Needing an agonist there. If we truly are going to have people benefit from hemp, that whole family needs to be there. We need to have both CB1, CB2 support, which is not going to happen with just CBD. Anyway, going full circle, why focus on a single magic bullet when we have such legal issues that are not going to go away unless they dismantle Deshay, which they're not going to do?
Somebody take that one.
I'm not sure what the question is. Are you?
I hate to say this, greed. Because if you have a unique ingredient, I can spin it, I can market it, I can tell a story behind it. That's just my experience from representing clients for a long time. They want one specific thing they can zone into and talk about.
Carl,
I want a reason.
If I can just weigh in for a second when you're done.
Yep.
Carl, and we're friends for a long time. I want to report back from the front lines of all the health food stores where I've spent, as you know, my entire career. That is exactly where the market is, and it's exactly where the market's going. So the message, it's just like ascorbic acid versus the complex biochemical matrix of food, and that resonates with our audience. So, although CBD was the buzzword, I think everybody now knows about the hemptourage or the entourage effect. So really, I do believe that your message and others' messages about the aromatic phytocompounds that have supported the ECS, unbeknownst to us, and sort of unlocking some of the mystery of plants and how they can help us with anxiety and sort of well-being. I just want you to know that is the message that's selling best. The only reason that the CBD isolate products were selling at all was simply because they had sort of a price advantage. But my observation is we're moving towards what you're talking about.
Thanks. We're going to open up to some additional questions. I did have a question because Todd Harrison spent a lot of time talking about FDA and what do we do about FDA? It's like, well, FDA, they're out there, but we don't really care. We're just going to do our own thing and just hope they don't take any action. So I'd really like to hear from the business guys and also the other lawyers, what can we do? For example, you mentioned, Todd, FDA may be agreeable to hemp extracts and dietary supplements. Do we invest millions of dollars to submit a new dietary ingredient notification to the agency and then go through the administrative process and then it ends up in federal court? Is there some lawsuit in the works? What do the other lawyers or other business people think about? What do you do with FDA? How do you move forward and just stop talking about it?
Well, let me just address that for a second. For those of you who don't know today, there's a new Attorney General of the United States. Sessions turned in his resignation this morning, and the new acting Attorney General is fellow Matthew Whitaker, who is a former U.S. Attorney from the District of Iowa, who obviously had a lot to do with Chuck Grassley. So in my judgment, as one of the other people talked about, it's a multi-vision approach to it all. But don't forget, I mean, the FDA is, even in a Pollyanna world, a servant of the government. I think that what this audience did today in the congregation of believers, so to speak, in 1994 to get the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act passed can be equally effective here with respect to proposed legislation. If whether they're Republican or Democrat, don't respond, we need to have a tidal wave of opinion, engulf them in what our beliefs are and what we stand for, and the government will react. That's what I think.
All right. Do we have any other questions? Sir, do we have any other questions? Okay.
Hi, Rick Hinkson from Safety Call International. My question's for Jim. And you had talked about the idea of companies categorizing their product as a medical food. And as I recall, medical foods have to be administered under the supervision of a physician, which is kind of a difficult situation if you want to sell it in the health food stores. So maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
The question had to do with medical foods. The speaker brought up the issue about can medical foods really be a viable commercial product for many of the companies here, because it has to be used under the supervision of a physician. That is correct. That is one of the elements for a medical food. But there are a lot of medical foods on the market today. Under the supervision of a physician is kind of open for debate about what the parameters of that means. So in a very technical sense, he's correct. The speaker makes a really good point. However, don't stop there, because there are a lot of products on the marketplace for folks that are growing older, Ensure and other products that are on the marketplace being sold in stores, and not just in a very limited manner. But clearly, though, it's less of a product opportunity than dietary supplements. The last thing I want to comment, and I'm not going to break in like this again, but I talked a little about the Federal Trade Commission. Some of you may not know what their role is in all of this. The Federal Trade Commission really shares responsibility with the FDA for looking about claims about your food products. But the big difference is the FTC is the big bear in the room. The FDA is not the big bear in the room. The FTC has, if they want to start an investigation by thinking that you're making what I'll call an outrageous or a very aggressive claim for your hemp or CBD product, they can issue subpoenas called CIDs in advance of starting a lawsuit. That entails a 2-year investigation. Probably 95% of those investigations end in settlement agreements. And the FTC's pound of flesh is they want you to pay back every dollar of gross sales you got from a product where there was a false or misleading advertisement involved. Therefore, I'm pleading with you, when you make your claims, do a good job of making sure that you have a reasonable amount of science to support it. You don't want to be on the back end of an FTC investigation.
I just want to add, back to Josh's question, engaging the agency is always a good thing. I'm engaging the agency on a very difficult level right now. But I have found the agency receptive. They've appreciated with all the science we have come in with them with it, and they're enjoying the dialogue. If we go to the agency with a good, coherent reason why hemp extracts should be allowed to be marketed, why they're different from CBD, they will listen. And they may very well surprise us. Because they haven't closed it off. That is one area they haven't. And believe it or not, if I had to deal with all the agencies that I have to deal with, I much prefer the FDA over the FTC or a plaintiff attorney. They want to do what's right. And if we can show that there's a lot of benefits to just maintaining overall health, they will listen to it. And they may very well surprise us.
Next question.
I would just add one more point to that, Josh. I would say that the FDA has taken a public position in writing when it addressed the DEA. Several months ago, that letter had come to fruition recently, although it wasn't withheld, it just wasn't identified. That letter from the FDA says that the FDA does not want to treat cannabinoids like controlled substances. In the process of this, you have the United Nations World Health Organization echoing the same thing, and you have legislation going forward. We don't necessarily need to get into the specific nuance as to why we disagree, although I still don't understand the legal basis for the disagreement about the federal legality. But my point is the FDA does say very, very clearly that in its advice to the DEA that this should not be treated as a controlled substance. So engage with the regulators is my point. I think Todd's exactly spot on if you have regulators that your lawyer or people know. When we engaged, we gave them that piece of information. They said, oh, we didn't even know this was a top-down directive or a policy. And so they were far more interested in having that dialogue than before.
I was wondering more, there's a lot of us in the room right now who are thinking, how can we use this into our products? But I really want to figure out is, where do you see us supporting this or helping? Like, what's the vision for all of us kind of coming together, and how does that affect it? And I don't mean like generally it will spread more awareness and like get it, but like, what's the actual projection on that?
I'll try to address what can you do. I think it's about accountability for yourself, for everyone you do business with. Let's face it, the natural products industry, they were the bad boys of the supplements, the food industry for a long, long time. They came out and there were a lot of depressants, stimulants into the marketplace. The DSHEA Act ultimately provided some guidance, but these are not products that didn't have, over time, because of bad actors primarily, an impact on society. So what I'm trying to suggest is, at that point in time, the history would suggest that the industry banded together. It did business with people that held themselves to higher standards. It got rid of the bad actors, not because the government told them to do so, although there was certainly a curtain and government officials behind that curtain saying that. It was because the industry wanted to self-police and clean itself up. That's what I believe this industry can do, and that's why good players are successful, because they've fraternized and associated with people that have the same high standards and so forth and so on.
If I can just interject for a second, hempsupporter.com, if you want the online community, hempsupporter.com. I'm sure we remember Chuck Grassley recently wanted to remove some extract language from the hemp farming bill. Because people joined hempsupporter.com, they sent mass emails. There were tens and tens of thousands of responses. So if you're asking about what's the interactive thing that we can do right now, it's to have millions and millions of people on the same page at hempsupporter.com.
Yeah, and important to remember what Jim said. The new acting attorney general is out of Chuck Grassley's backyard. Chuck Grassley did want that language out of the bill. He's not a fan of it. So that may signal where the new AG would do. But what I go back to this. The industry should file a citizen petition requesting FDA to allow the marketing of it. That will allow, once that citizen petition is filed, it will allow all of you and everybody in the industry and everybody in the United States to file comments. Now, I'm not saying file form comments. Everybody will get the chance to file comments as to why FDA should allow it.
It's kind of, in another way, as we talked about and Todd and the other speakers were a part of in 1994 when DSHEA got enacted. It's working together and flooding the FDA, whether it's joining in a citizen's petition or separate petitions. The government will react to all of that. Something else I wanted to bring up is, as a part of all of this business of how to stay out of the eyesight and comply with the law so you don't get into problems even before or after the new Farm Bill is passed, you got to recognize that there's an intricate set of regulations that have been promulgated by the FDA in the last few years about good manufacturing practices, about verifying foreign suppliers. There are some people in this room that are now in the business of helping you verify where your products came from, like fingerprinting for botanicals. It's a very intricate set of things. It's these kind of laws, once we get the big issues that Bob talked about and we've all talked about, it's fundamentally doing your job on a daily basis in addition to making a big wave. You pay attention to the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and most of you are going to make a lot of money and not get into any trouble.
Well said. We have time for a few more questions.
Okay,
Yes?
So Todd had mentioned something about FDA possibly being willing to listen to a hemp seed oil. So going from NDI to GRAS status, right now, I was looking at it on the GRAS website, or the FDA's GRAS notices. There's one pending, number 778, from a company called Fresh Hemp Foods in Canada. So if, being that's pending, FDA hasn't given its opinion on it yet. If FDA does publish a notice that it does not support that this ingredient is GRAS, how does that impact the regulatory status?
Is it on hemp seeds? Or what is it on?
Hemp seed oil.
So hemp seed oil is no issue. It's the flowering parts that...
I mean, you could market hemp seed oil today.
So how does hemp seed oil differ from the full spectrum hemp oil?
Very little CBD in it.
There's no CBD. That's the crux of the issue, the misunderstanding of what we're talking about. Hemp seed oil is totally different than hemp extract, is totally different than CBD that's isolated.
And it goes back to what we said earlier. What Jim pointed out, if you're calling your product a hemp seed oil and it's really CBD, that product is misbranded under the law. You can't call a hemp extract or a CBD product hemp seed oil. It's not. Hemp seed oil is the oil from the seed. Literally, it's oil from the seed.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's a good question, and it's not necessary to get involved in what's hemp under the Controlled Substances Act for the purpose of that question. Yeah. Said very well.
How you doing? Tyshawn Bryant from Green Regimen. Just two quick questions for you. One is, and these are both in regards to full spectrum hemp, is it possible to have a USDA certified organic full spectrum hemp? And then so that's one answer. And then the second question is, in terms of efficacy loss when you actually intake and digest it, it goes through your digestive system. Is there a difference between using the tincture versus having like a CBD or full spectrum hemp edible?
I'll take the first one as far as organic certification. In 2015, Functional Remedy CBD Extracts, we were the first company in the country to receive organic certification through the USDA. So yes, you can. How about his second question?
On the bioavailability, that's such a nuanced question. This is so new. There are very, very few pharmacokinetic data studies that are showing the different routes of delivery. We hardly have PET scans to measure where your ECS is activated. We're away from that, from understanding that.
Question about the vape pens, where people are putting CBD in the vape pens. Does that get considered in any of this regulation differently?
That would not be a dietary supplement.
Right.
Dietary supplements are ingestible only. So.
Well, the answer is, that's really a good question. Because some people might argue a vape pen is a medical device, okay, which is a whole different area. That is, but the Controlled Substances Act doesn't distinguish between medical devices and food. I think it would be more of a medical device than a dietary supplement, but the ingredients in it could be considered to be a supplement. So you raise a really good point that comes up. So I would say it's probably twofold. The pen itself, or whatever the device is, would probably be considered to be a medical device, but the substance would be a dietary supplement.
The problem is that you couldn't inhale it. So remember, a supplement has to be ingested. So if you say you get the benefit from inhaling, you're a drug. And that's, so you may be stuck in what we call the office of combination hell.
Yeah, right.
And so the one thing none of us have talked about, I think we all agree, and that is cosmetics. That is actually an area where there's no exclusionary clause to even discuss.
No, I mean, right now, the Controlled Substances Act doesn't, exclude cosmetics at all.
Well, the CSA, once we get past, we're going to get past the CSA. Yeah. I'm comfortable with that.
But certainly you can't make structure function claims for cosmetics, like can't say pain. One thing I wanted to add, which again may take a longer time, but the positions that we have taken are, twofold. One, that FDA is not always correct. We're all sitting here assuming that the FDA has taken a position and they're 100% correct. When FDA says a statement that they think because of GW Pharmaceuticals clinical studies, this ingredient can't be a dietary ingredient. What if they're wrong? The agency is wrong all the time. And when we looked into it carefully, their interpretation is so conservative. What basically they're saying is there were substantial clinical investigations. So we looked at all the clinical investigations. You know what we found? 25 subject phase 1 study, phase 2 study. You don't get an approval on phase 1, phase 2 studies. So there's a lot of nuance that's involved in here, and that's some of the work that we're being hired and that we're doing is to prepare the industry for if there is a court fight. What are some of the arguments that we will be making? And those are not discussed because certainly there's not enough time. The second thing is there could be a marketing proof that CBD was marketed before the IND date. Again, that's also something that could be useful, and someone probably has that.
I like it when lawyers argue, so I'm going to have Todd.
We have also looked at that, and actually the phase 2 clinical trial was over 400 patients, and it was done quickly after the 2006 trial. Yeah. So we've looked at that. It's a hard argument to make. The phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials, if Congress would have meant phase 3 clinical trials, they would have said phase 3 clinical trials. Phase 3 clinical trials have been around forever.
Do you get approval on phase 3 studies? Phase 1 and 2? You don't. You don't get drug approval.
That doesn't mean it's not substantial clinical trials. If Congress had meant substantial clinical trials to mean phase 3 clinical trials, they would have said phase 3 clinical trials. A 400-person study, it would be hard to argue that's not substantial. And if if you're going to take that position, then nobody in this industry should be making a claim on a 40-person study.
Yeah, drug studies are not the same as nutrition
No,
studies.
it's not, but that's
What we're talking about is a very esoteric provision here of a draconian clause, and these
That
guys
we agree on, right?
That we totally
we agree that that should not be.
And I would agree if somebody came up with the evidence I would agree that to me the data is not the IND. To me it's the IND, but it's the start of the trial. FDA tries to date it back to IND. To me it should be the start of trials.
All right, we agree on something.
And I would love for, look at, there's evidence that CBD has been around for a long time in the food supply. Yeah, it's possible.
I'm going to give you a break from U.S. Let us go outside U.S. How's the regulatory landscape outside U.S. And beyond Canada, maybe, because Canada, it's approved?
We all should go to Canada and smoke.
Well, U.S. law is.
Well, I might be able to comment on it too, but please clear that up for Jim.
I see the confusion in U.S. and the resistance from the FDA. So what about outside U.S.? I heard about Israel, for example. There's a lot of work in Israel. In England, for example, there is G&W. So how hemp is looked at outside U.S.? And I came from the pharma industry. I work for Novartis, Merck, other companies. So it's clear-cut, IND, NDA, the clinical studies, and you get the approval. So how you navigate that maze outside U.S.? Is it easier outside U.S.? Do we see like similar things like ICH guidelines, for example, regulatory compliance for medication is much easier between Japan, Europe, and U.S.? Do we have anything like that to address the hemp or not?
Well, generally speaking, the laws in the other countries, like the EU, are much more regulatory specific than in the U.S. In some respects, that may make a more certain climate in which to commercialize a product. But however, in the U.S., because we have kind of a wide open commercial market, it's a lot more opportunity for people, and there are going to be a lot more problems involved with it. So we're opting for more or less a not regulated, but a less regulated industry for sure than in most parts of Europe and other parts of the world.
Thank you.
I would just add to that. My office, we have 10 offices outside the U.S., my law firm. This is what we do. We take one product and we try to figure out what you need to call it, what you need to package it, how you need to label it. That exact same product is going to be a different thing in multiple places. Is it a food here? Is it a drug? Is it a lower tier drug? Is it a supplement or something equivalent? That same product is a different thing in multiple jurisdictions. We've also written many of the regulatory structures for about a dozen countries across Latin America and a half a dozen across Europe. So I can tell you that the acceleration in the global hemp marketplace, CBD marketplace, is off the charts. 2 years ago, I couldn't believe people in the United States were still calling me, saying, how do we get into the CBD industry? This is what we like to do. Because we're a business law firm. We help build businesses. We build out your structure. We provide the infrastructure, the network. I couldn't believe it 2 years ago, and it's still happening here today. In Europe and in Latin America, especially Europe, the numbers are staggering. It is far more than a hockey stick curve. It is almost an elevator type curve. This is remarkable what I'm seeing. So the point is, if you're a United States-based operator and you develop a brand, you might be able to take that brand and participate in markets outside of the United States, but you've got to position it uniquely based on what that country would allow. And it's highly unlikely, to Jim's point, that you're going to take that material from the U.S. and export it into other markets, although there's exceptions to that rule. But that's what we're seeing. That's what gets me the most excited, which is also why I say this is here to stay. The wheel is turning. It won't slow down.
In interests of perhaps moving it forward for most of the people in the room, don't you think that producers need to focus on CGMP compliance And I'm not saying that just because that's what I do as a consultant, but because, and I know you guys all do that too. But we just had this week FDA pronounce yet again that CBD is flat out illegal. And then if you go take it down the logical tree, well, what about that plaintiff's bar that's going to sue you for your illegally labeled product? Wouldn't it be more helpful if everybody who's trying to stay in this market and keep their heads above, you know, a safe level, label correctly as hemp extract from flower and leaf, and not standardize it so they're not trying to create a drug, and avoid making stupid claims about disease treatment and get on with the business?
Because hemp extract from farm relief gives you a DEA issue for right now. It gives you a DEA issue right now. You don't want to. You don't. People are. If you say it's from the flower and the leaf, you're creating a DEA issue because now you're marijuana. Marijuana is not defined as 0.3.
And to compete, we have to be GMP. And in the retail space, I mean, it's almost, it's really known. Like in the really great independent health food stores, you can't walk in with a brand new product with a big smile on your face and not demonstrate that you're GMP. So the message really is getting out. That consolidation is happening very at lightning speed. I'd like my attorney to answer the question.
Thank you for the plug. Basically, you know, what we call is a risk management program, okay? And how I was saying in this speeding context, if you're in this business, you're not speeding under the speed limit, right? That we can all agree, because there is lots of gray. Within that context, you put in a risk management program, which is 100% CGMP compliance, auditing, because I say it as a context of when you're driving on a highway, you don't want a broken light. So GMP is a technical requirement, you have to have it. Claims, not only substantiation for your claims, but any claims you make cannot be disease claims. So you need substantiation plus structure function claims. And then safety, which is a huge portion. You know, 6 years ago, 4 years ago, when we started talking to them, in terms of what data is out there. The last study was done when?
1981.
1981. And so everyone is interested in selling a product, but they don't want to spend time and effort to do the tox work. Again, that's very important because FDA is a public health agency. They're not really in the business of technicality, IND preclusion, all of that. They will at some point if it affects safety. Otherwise, it's a $2 billion industry. What is FDA doing? I know they're very slow, but if it's a safety concern, they will work overnight. Because I've had calls on Sundays with FDA regarding a safety concern, something else, salmonella. So the thing is, safety is very important, tox work is very important, GMP claims, and then follow the market, the states, the county that are regulating. You don't want to be in a county where they're saying they're going to arrest people, right? Certainly, so follow all those state, and that's the most you can do as a business. On a trade association end, you figure out your legal path. And if there is a war, you prepare for that war. And some of the things is it the same article? I know Todd doesn't agree with the substantial, but if there is a lawsuit, I'm sure people will make that argument and then have proof of marketing. I know we have spent hundreds of hours, thousands of hours looking for it. It's out there. We may have something. Again, it's not public. But what I'm trying to say is you have to have a war chest, and as a business, you do what you can.
All right, thanks. So I know some other people have questions, but I like to respect people's time once you get out of here on time. I'm going to give everybody, except Ashish, he had a great closing right there, an opportunity for a 60-second, 30-second takeaway. We'll start with Jim just talking to the mics, and we can get going.
Thank you. I'm going to revert back to my discussion about the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Remember, if you're, as most of you are, will have an ingredient or product being sold as a dietary supplement. One of the things that you have to do is inform the consumer what part of the plant that your ingredient is from. That presents a problem for a lot of people sitting in this room. They don't know whether the CBD came from the stalk, from the flower, what part of the plant. But yet the Dietary Supplement Act calls for a part of the plant from which it came. And so how do you solve that problem? It's an issue yet to be decided by the FDA. You might say whole plant, because in any respect, you don't want to tell an untruth. So I'm closing with this. From the standpoint of outside of the realm of the DEA, from the standpoint of the food industry, get familiar with the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, the part of the law that deals with conventional foods that are something other than dietary supplements. Get a consultant to help you with following GMPs. And above all, think about what your product is really for and get some good science to support it. It's been my pleasure to work with all of you today, to have you have an audience. And since 1990, I've been involved with this industry. I think it's a great industry, it will continue to be, and wish you all the best.
Jim's like my big brother. You could actually be my father, but I know. Or as my kids remind me all the time, my father has more hair than I do, and he's 88. Everything about business is about risk and managing your risk. I agree with that. But understand the risk you're taking before you take it. The risk may be worth it. I have some clients that I have no idea why they take the risk. But you evaluate it, understand the pros, the cons, the strengths, and the weaknesses of all the legal arguments, because they're only legal arguments. Remember, we're just lawyers. If you listen to everything we say, you won't sell anything, and we won't have a job. And do your best. Just do your due diligence and think it out. And be prepared what you want to do if the hammer falls. Because it's very simple. You might have 3-5 years, great run. You get the letter, I'm done. So think about it that way. Think it from just your practical business perspective. Always have a out. Always have an escape plan. There's risk. That's life. Have your escape plan and make sure you're comfortable with it. Or be ready to fight it.
Well, I just wanted to say thanks to all of you guys. Josh, great job today. Thank you. This was a great panel to be on. And a lot of great information, a lot of stuff for you guys to decipher. In this world of turbulent water here, you guys treat this as a poker game. Watch each card you play and play it slow. This is going to be a unique industry. Sit back, listen to consultants, get those folks on your team who know the industry well, know the ins and outs, and help you along in your business. Thanks.
The opportunity presented by the plant, whether it's a food or as a supplement, makes you dizzy with possibilities. At the end of the day, there are so many things you can do with this plant, from a lot of consumer-facing products, from animal products to food, medicinal foods, and so forth and so on. But at the end of the day, to Todd's point, you've got to make a decision based on how much risk you're willing to take. Advisors can only paint a picture for you. You need to add some color to that picture. So taking in the information and understand that there are going to be people that are going to agree. It doesn't mean somebody's wrong necessarily, especially when you're talking about federal legality, and one lawyer has actual documents from a federal judge that says a certain thing, but that's neither here nor there. At the end of the day, you need to look at what your risk tolerance is and proceed accordingly, and only that far. And if you get that far and you've succeeded and you sold your first couple of batches of units and you've invested in infrastructure, then move on from here. But one last note on the Controlled Substances Act. There's really two issues here. Number one, is CBD a controlled substance? Number two, is industrial hemp a controlled substance? Those are different questions, okay? Different questions, and I want you to think about it. We can disagree with what the Farm Bill said or may have said as it relates to industrial hemp, but one thing's for certain. that CBD has not specifically identified in the Controlled Substances Act. Not one cannabinoid other than psychoactive THC is. So if you're selling CBD, again, I would encourage you to go into the purview of a hemp extract. That's a full spectrum or a broad spectrum. But at the end of the day, CBD is not a controlled substance to this very minute, and industrial hemp, it will be fixed.
I'd like to suggest that we've got a few different narratives working at exactly the same time, and that might be making us uncomfortable. In the article that you referenced that I believe Stephen Daniels wrote on nutri-ingredients about Stephen Tave's comments at the CRN meeting, I encourage everyone to get that article. I think it came out just yesterday. Get to the end of the article, and the director of the Dietary Supplement Office at FDA says, what I envision when I talk about well-regulated dietary supplements are three things. And these are all three things, and what you do for a living, right, is part of that. Number one, is the product safe? Now that we've done the GRAS self-affirmation, everyone can do it faster, cheaper, easier. You have no excuse. Do it. Number two, he said, does the product contain what it says on the label? Okay, look at the Consumer Lab report, consumer.com, their report. They looked at a bunch of products. They said they all met label claim that they looked at. That's a really, really, really good sign. And number three, that there's a belief that these products do what we think they do. Now, on the clinical side, CBD on top of standard of care lowers seizures 40% on top of standard of care, a natural molecule. I've spent my whole life in this industry like most of us. We won. We won. That was an extraordinary feat. That's a drug that's completely different than a wellness product. So I hope everyone will go forward without being afraid. I want to close with this. Just go into your local health food stores. Just go ask them. Do it again, even if you've done it before. Do it today. Ask them what they're hearing from people on the front line. And ask yourself, remind yourself why you got into this business. To ease the suffering of others. That's why we do this. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. Let's thank our panelists, and also please fill out the feedback form. Thank you.